Lolo led the dwarves to their new temporary home and showed them all the amenities that came with it. Thrain and the rest of the dwarves jumped up and almost cursed the high heavens when Lolo flicked the switch mounted on the wall and turned on the bright light in the living room. By my beard! What is that light? They couldn't believe that such a bright light could be emitted from such a small, glowing wire. And just like before, there was nothing magical about it either. It was as natural as the air, which confused them even more. Michael had to teach them the basics of electricity and how everything was being powered through the steam turbine. Harnessing lightning. Who would have thought that such a dangerous element could lead to such a useful source of power? Thrain said, staring at the light bulb for too long. The more they stayed in the village, the more they understood that this place was more advanced than even the richest metropolis in the world. Its technology was miles above that of the Dwarven Kingdom, just by virtue of the plumbing system by itself. Not to mention the electricity, everything they pulled off in this village was nothing more than fantasy for other places. And in terms of wealth, they had all of it as well. After all Hobmankeys could eat as much as they wanted, they could drink as much as they wanted, and they obtained everything they wanted from the village for free. Every Hobmankey contributed to the village's well-being, allowing all of them to live as freely as they did right now. One by one, groups of Hobmankeys visited the dwarves' abode and gave them little gifts and trinkets to welcome them into their village. The Hobmankeys gave them daily items like cups, plates, and other such objects that would make their lives comfortable in their new home. Some seamstresses also gave the dwarves well-knitted clothes and ponchos that fit them perfectly. They had the innate power to create comfortable clothes just by sight alone, which surprised the dwarves. Everyone in this village was powerful in their own right. They had knowledge, skill, and power which were characteristics that no demi-human should have obtained. What confused the dwarves the most was that Michael seemed to be surrounded by extremely talented individuals. This was far too much of a coincidence. Not only that, but the Mankeys were also completely different from what they were taught. Everyone said yellow Mankeys were not complex enough to wield magic or smart enough to build even the simplest of tools. Yet, what they saw was the complete opposite. The engineers of this village were a lot smarter than even the proudest of blacksmith dwarves. This led them to become even more impressed at Michael, the human who started all of this in the first place. After getting acclimated to their surroundings, Michael let the dwarves wander around the village at their own discretion. They went through the farms, the steam turbine, and the plaza. As they were walking through the streets of the village, Thrain and the other dwarves suddenly heard the sound of a satisfying metal clink ring out from a distance. Then, this was followed by raucous cheering that seemed to emanate through the streets. "What's that?" Thrain asked. "Oh, that," Michael said with a bit of smile. "That's just a little game that I spread to the villagers." It quickly became popular within the Hobmankeys, with most youths spending their time playing it during the day. "A game?" asked Thrain with curiosity. Michael answered by leading them towards a large field on the outskirts of the village. The area was diamond-shaped, with Hobmankeys placed in specific places on the 4 plates. The juvenile Hobmankey in the middle of the field had a serious look on his face as he stared down his opponent. Opposite him was another Hobmankey who wielded a metal bat, lightly swinging it in preparation for what was to come. The Hobmankey in the middle winded up his arm and threw the ball with such speed and ferocity that the wind whistled as it cleaved through the air. Just as the ball was about to go past the metal bat, the Hobmankey suddenly twisted his hips and brought power to his hands, allowing the bat to accurately hit the fastball, sending it flying through the air. The crowd of Hobmankeys watching on the sidelines and bleachers all screamed in excitement. "Home run!" They cheered as the Hobmankey with the bat rounded out the bases on the diamond field. Michael smiled as he pointed at the energized camaraderie between the players and the audience. "That is baseball," he proclaimed. The dwarves looked on at the game with a burning curiosity. Even though they didn't know the rules of the game, they were all taken by the intense focus and seriousness among the players. Not only that, but the energy oozing between them was palpable. Their joy upon hitting that ball to the ends of the horizon was nothing less than exhilarating. Experience more on Empire. After the game, The batter on the mound slowly approached Michael and the dwarves. He slowly took off his hat and showed himself to be Kong, the chief engineer of this village. "Boss, you came to see me win. I'm getting better, right? I'm sure I'll knock your ball right out of the park the next time we play a game," Kong said, his excitement showing on his face. "You still have a lot to learn, Padawan," Michael replied. "We'll play a game tonight, and I'll show you who's the ace." The dwarves couldn't believe the camaraderie and fellowship between everyone in the village. They all seemed to be united with this one game. Those who won showed happiness as if they had just won a war. And those who lost showed no sadness, only an intense desire to get better. And even still, they showed respect and admiration for each other regardless of the outcome. This sparked a desire for the dwarves to learn more about this strange game called baseball. Michael saw their curious looks and invited them to watch tonight's match with their own eyes. "You should see the game tonight," he said to them. "The Cleaving Chefs are fighting against the Brainiac Engineers." The sun soon set on the village, with darkness covering the whole landscape of the parched lands. Yet, there was one single patch of land in this desolate territory that was shining brighter than the stars in the sky. As soon as the night came, the village turned on the switches for the lights. The lamps by the side streets and the bulbs on the porches of houses illuminated everything for the inhabitants of the village, making it easy for them to go where they wanted even in the night. Lolo led Thrain and the rest of the dwarves, including the seniors and the children, through the crowded streets full of excited hobmankeys. As they walked alongside the hobmankeys, Thrain heard their excited conversations about the upcoming match. "Who do you think will win?" "I bet it's the Brainiac Engineers." "Kong is really good at batting," said an excited kid. TSK. You know nothing, my man. Don't you know that our boss will sub in as the pitcher for the Cleavers?" "They'll win for sure," refuted the other kid. "Either way, I'm excited. It makes me want to play baseball again. Let's do it tomorrow. I'll invite the others." Anywhere the dwarves looked, they saw excited and expectant faces on the hobmankeys. All they seemed to talk about was baseball and everything related to it. Michael taught them everything there was to know about baseball, including its rules and regulations. So, they would easily be able to follow the upcoming game. However, they knew nothing about the two teams playing, the Cleaving Chefs and the Brainiac Engineers. Everyone formed a team based on their specialties, Lolo explained. For example, Kong and the rest of the engineers formed their own baseball team called the Brainiac Engineers. They pride themselves on being the most strategic. The Cleaving Chefs, on the other hand, is almost full of butchers who boast a really heavy hand perfect for knocking the ball into the air. This has led to the teams, as well as the fans that are rooting for their team to win, to become extremely competitive against each other, Lolo explained. And just as he said that, a group of hobmankeys wearing some kind of similar blue uniform faced off against another group of hobmankeys with a different red uniform. "You guys should go home now. Our engineers will cleave your chances of winning," said the blue-uniformed hobmankeys. "Huh, we'll make you eat your words. You won't be able to calculate where the ball ends up once our players knock it out of the park," answered the red-uniformed hobmankeys. The two different groups continued to answer taunts back and forth, livening up the energy of the night. It came to a point where even the dwarves ended up getting caught up in the debate between the two groups. "Ah, our new comrades," said the group rooting for the chefs. "Give them the fries. Give them the hot dogs." The dwarves were suddenly given all sorts of food and snacks from the group in an attempt to get them to their side. They were each given the same red uniform the group was wearing, with their names etched on the back along with a random number. "Hot dogs and fries are essential in a baseball game," said the red group. "If you side with us, you can eat all you want." The blue group answered by giving them their own blue uniform. "Well, if you side with us, we can adjust your homes to your liking." "That's cheating," answered the red group. "You were bribing them," replied the blue group. The debate continued, and was only stopped after Lolo sent the two groups to their own designated spots on opposite sides of the bleachers. Lolo escorted the dwarves to their seats in the middle, which were considered the best seats in the game. Thrain looked around and felt as if he was in a fever dream. Everything felt surreal. The skies were dark, yet the whole field was lit up by huge, bright lights that illuminated the whole field and the bleachers. Everyone was at their seats, talking excitedly while eating snacks and drinking water to pass the time. Somehow, the dwarves felt like they were in another world. They had never experienced something like this before, or even dreamed that this was possible. In a place of survival, they would have never thought that a pastime like this could even exist. After a few minutes, the players began taking their places on the field, with a hobmanki at the pitcher's mound, tossing the ball in his hand. Opposite him was a batter, who readied his metal bat and swung it a couple of times to keep himself warm. FWE, FWE. The whistle sounded out through the field, signaling the start of the game. On the first pitch, the batter swung his metal bat hard, barely missing the ball that whizzed past his body. Groans and sounds of disappointment rang out within the crowd. On the second pitch, another wild swing from the batter would let the ball crash at the catcher's mitt, garnering another groan from the audience. That means he has 2 strikes, right? Why isn't he hitting the ball? Asked Thrain, with a little bit of frustration showing in his bushy beard. You're not looking at the pitcher, answered the dwarf next to him. The speed and curve of the ball is not so easy to hit. It doesn't seem so, answered Thrain, feeling as if the ball was quite easy to knock out of the park. Just then, the batter swung his bat on the ball again, this time making contact. However, the ball flew in the other direction, making it a foul ball. Thrain shouted a little bit too loud, making himself feel embarrassed. Enjoy news stories from Empire. I just don't understand how he's missing these, he said. I think he should position his shoulders a little bit more to the left like this. Thrain started to copy the batter's pose and swung his hand as if he were the one on the field. That won't work, my dear friend, answered the dwarf on his side. If I throw the ball fast enough, I doubt you'll be able to hit it as easily as you think. That's right, answered another dwarf. What are you guys talking about? As long as you keep your eye on the ball, anyone can hit it, no matter how fast it is, replied another dwarf. But what about a curve? The dwarves began to argue to themselves, leaving Lolo to chuckle to himself. The dwarves had taken a liking to the sport, it seemed. The game continued, with the Cleaving Chefs taking the early lead in the opening innings. But soon after, the Brainiac engineers proved their strategy of slow but steady paid off as they even out the score. Finally, it was the bottom of the 9th inning. This was the last chance the 2 teams would get to score. The Chefs were pitching, while the engineers were batting. Kong was up at the plate, swinging his bat as he eyed the pitcher on the mound. This was a crucial moment, yet there was no nervousness in his face. He was excited. Finally, the pitcher threw the ball high up on the box, making it seem as if it was out. But Kong was not deceived. He charged his shoulders, swinging the bat a little bit below where the ball seemed to be going. And just as Kong predicted, the ball suddenly curved downwards, perfectly meeting the metal bat in the perfect spot, eliciting a very satisfying dink before sending the ball flying off into the air. Another home run, the crowd cheered. Kong and his 2 other teammates rounded out the bases, scoring a crucial 3 points for their team to take the lead. But of course, the Chefs didn't let the game be over yet. Finally, at the top of the 9th inning, they were the one to bat. This was their final chance to decide who would end up the winner. The Chefs used their brute strength to send the balls flying to the field, letting 3 of their players stand on each base. However, this came at a cost. They had 2 outs. One more, and they would lose the game entirely. They needed a miracle home run to convert those 3 players into points on the board. In such a crucial do-or-die situation, the Cleaving Chefs finally sent in their trump card. Michael slowly walked towards the field with the hobmankis and the dwarves cheering in excitement as the 2 best players finally faced off in the final minutes of the game. Continue your journey with Empire. Kong was on the mound, his eyes burning in competitiveness as he finally got the chance to try and strike out his boss. Ever since Michael showed them this game, none of the hobmankis had ever won a game off of him. But Kong had prepared for this moment. This was his chance to show off his hard work. Michael, on the other hand, welcomed Kong's intense stare down with a simple shrug of the shoulders, showing his relaxed attitude even in the tensest of situations. Finally, Kong threw his first ball, sending it straight down the middle of the catcher's mitt. This was perhaps the fastest pitch in the game, making the crowd erupt in excitement and hype. Michael let the first pitch go without swinging meaning that it was his first strike. He just smiled and nodded in respect at Kong's improved skill. Then, on the second pitch, the ball seemed to be as fast as the first one, making the crowd think Kong pitched the same ball as before. Yet, when the ball was about to reach the mitt, it dramatically curved downwards and landed perfectly on the catcher's mitt. Michael let this ball go as well, making it his second strike. He just had one more chance. The whole crowd was silent. They were on the edge of their seats. The dwarves all stood up and stared at the game with bated breaths. The tension was palpable. This last pitch would decide it all. Kong took a deep breath and wound up his shoulders before sending the last ball flying toward the plate. Just when everyone thought it was over, Michael finally twisted his shoulders, bringing the bat speeding towards the incoming ball. And as the ball got closer, it curved to the left. But Michael seemed to have predicted this and moved his bat accordingly, hitting the ball high up in the air and out onto the field. Everything seemed to have turned into slow motion. The crowd watched as the ball flew into the air and curved down towards the middle section of the bleachers. The dwarves were stunned, not expecting the ball to fly towards their section. One brave dwarven child raised her hand, letting the ball fall perfectly in her hand. Then silence. The crowd of spectators and the players on the field all looked at the dwarven child holding the ball in her hands. I caught the home run ball," she screamed. And finally, everyone erupted in cheers, celebrating such a momentous occasion. The game was so close, with the Brainiac engineers looking to have finally clutched a win. Yet, at the very last moment, Michael was able to pull off a miracle home run that scored the Chefs 4 points, winning them the whole game. But the results of the game didn't matter for the crowd of Hobmankeys or the dwarves. They cheered the sheer entertainment and excitement they felt throughout the whole game. The dwarves and the Hobmankeys celebrated together, jumping and hugging each other in celebration. Even the two sides of the bleachers finally broke their rivalry and celebrated together. Blue-uniformed fans hugged their red-uniformed rivals, applauding each other for such a good game. While they were celebrating, Thrain took a moment to himself and observed his surroundings. His fellow dwarves were shouting in excitement and showing smiles that almost made the braids on their beards open up. It was hard to believe that they experienced something calamitous only a few days ago. For a moment, they all forgot the sorrows of yesterday and let go of the anxieties of tomorrow. For now, they enjoyed the moment with everyone else. It hadn't even been a day, yet he was starting to love this village, this community. After the game, everyone took their celebrations to the village plaza, where food and drinks were shared all around. Michael took to the stage and unveiled one of his current projects that he had been working on. "Sorry, kids, but this one is just for adults," he said as he used his magic to bring multiple barrels to the plaza, each one with a tap on the bottom. "This is called beer, and it is best enjoyed cold." Michael had been in this medieval world for 10 years, yet he had never seen a single beer in his life. As it turned out, beer hadn't yet been invented in this place at all, which was very surprising. When he found this out, he quickly decided to produce his own beer. Luckily, one of the crops that grew on the farms was barley, which meant he had an ample amount of ingredients to make beer. And so he did. When the dwarves came here, he found it fitting to finally announce this new product to the village. The adult Hobmankeys all sniffed the rich aroma of the beer and couldn't help but be interested in this strange drink. As for the dwarves, they immediately felt inclined to try out this new alcoholic drink. They were, of course, famed for their big belly full of ale and alcohol. So, they were the first ones to try out this new product. Michael opened one of the barrel taps and poured a drink into the wooden cup in his hands. Then, he presented it to Thrain and the rest of the dwarves, who eyed the beer with curiosity and a little bit of scrutiny. They had refined tastes. No normal alcohol would make them satisfied, much less this strange new yellowish drink that foamed at the top. "Michael, I must warn you that we might not like this beer of yours. If so, then please do not take it as a slight against you. Our tongues are merely more suited to ale or other types of alcohol," Thrain said, completely confident that he wouldn't like this beer. Michael may beat them in terms of technical and mechanical advancements, but Thrain's dwarven pride couldn't back down at Michael's attempt to make alcohol. "Just try it out," Michael said, chuckling to himself. Thrain carefully took the wooden cup offered to him and noticed that it was very cold to the touch. Cold alcohol? Strange. Thrain muttered to himself. Alcohol was famed for its ability to warm up the body. So, it was incredibly strange for it to be as cold as the winter ice. Thrain sniffed at the beer before finally taking a small sip from the cup. The rest of the dwarves all looked at Thrain's expression, curious as to how this new beer compared to the best Alashan alcohols that the Dwarven Kingdom could offer. At the very first sip, Thrain took the cup out of his mouth and wiped the foam off from his beard and mustache. His eyes widened as he observed the beer with intense scrutiny. The dwarves thought his expression was indicative of the beer's bad taste. "How is it, friend? It tastes bland, does it not? Surely, after all, ale is the superior alcoholic drink. Give here, Thrain. I will see for myself how bad this beer tastes like." But just as the dwarf was about to take the beer away from Thrain's hands, he suddenly shoved it away and gulped the whole cup in one go, surprising the rest of the dwarves. "Ah!" A satisfied sigh released out of Thrain's mouth, his beard still stained with beer foam. "This is the nectar of the gods," he proclaimed. "Michael, this beer is like sugar to my taste buds. It's not as alcoholic as ale, but it is all the better for it. Its cold temperature also makes it so much better to drink. It's as if I'd been thirsty this whole time, and I simply did not know it. Only when I drank this beer did I finally feel refreshed. Its coldness soothes my soul." Thrain's relentless praise for the beer led the other dwarves to feel as if they had to drink the beer. Read exclusive content at Empire. "Michael, can you please pour me one? I shall be the first one to drink. I want to know what it tastes like. I refuse to believe it's better than ale before I drink it myself." Michael had to assure the dwarves that there were plenty for everyone. He poured everyone their own cups of beer. "Drink all that you want," he said. "Tonight is a celebration." The dwarves began drinking the cold beer, and just like Thrain, their eyes widened as they finally realized why Thrain had praised this alcoholic drink to the high heavens. "Oh, by my beard, this shall be my new water. I could drink the whole barrel for myself. Why hasn't our Dwarven Kingdom ever invented such a drink?" The dwarves filled themselves with alcohol, their cheeks slowly becoming redder and redder. However, Thrain noticed that they were the only ones getting drunk. The hobmankeys only looked at the beer with curious looks, but weren't courageous enough to take a sip for themselves. "What are you all waiting for?" he asked them. "It's not as alcoholic as ale, so you can drink as much as you want." Their awkward silence made Thrain realize the problem. "You guys haven't drunk any alcohol in your lives, haven't you?" The rest of the dwarves stopped their merry drinking and looked at the hobmankeys with pure disbelief painted on their faces. This was akin to blasphemy. As regular mankeys, they had trouble finding simple water. They couldn't afford to buy alcohol, even if it was available in the desert wasteland. "This is unacceptable," Thrain said, walking over to Kong and offering him his drink. "You have a good mind, but sometimes this leads you to overthink. It's why I think you lost in the baseball match. It is better to let go of all your inhibitions. Drink." The rest of the dwarves also poured beer on cups and offered them to the hobmankeys who were a little bit hesitant to drink. "You taught us how to play baseball. This time, we will teach you how to drink alcohol." Surprisingly enough, the first hobmankey to take a drink was Lolo, the oldest hobmankey in the village. He was just going to take a sip to try it out, but as the cold beer washed over his body, Lolo couldn't help but finish the whole bottle. "Ah," he said in excitement. "That's good." The dwarves couldn't help but laugh, knowing that Lolo's reaction to his first alcoholic drink was relatable. Soon, the rest of the hobmankeys started drinking beer with the dwarves, with the celebration at the plaza becoming more and more lively and soon becoming a party. The celebrations continued, with the dwarves teaching the hobmankeys everything they knew about drinking alcohol. Laughter and slurred speeches resounded through the town plaza, even deep into the night. Thrain and Lolo became quite competitive about drinking and competed in a game on who could finish a cup of beer the fastest. Even Fudge, who usually stayed in Michael's shadow, couldn't help but join in on the festivities. He ended up becoming quite the mascot for the village, with him showing everyone his ninja moves, which was quite contrary to what a real ninja should do. The dwarves joined in too, making fun of themselves by braiding their beards in odd and strange ways. One even made Michael's likeness onto the beard, which everyone enjoyed quite well. Kong and the other hobmankeys felt themselves becoming closer to the dwarves on a deeper level. They began talking about their lives before this, and how everything seemed hopeless and lost. Then, everything changed when they met Michael. Both dwarves and the hobmankeys understood each other on that end. So many dwarves and hobmankeys continued to drink beer that all the barrels Michael prepared were dried to the last drop. The hobmankeys, due to their stronger constitution from evolving into a higher species, found themselves able to compete against the dwarves in a drinking game. But of course, the dwarves still drank them under the table. Enjoy more content from Empire. By the end of the night, the only ones still awake were Michael, who refrained from drinking, and Thrain, who proved to be the one with the strongest stomach. This beer, Michael, it's quite something else. Even the royal dwarves with the most refined taste would find themselves taking a liking to this cold beverage. And it's not just this beer, Michael. Everything you have made in this desolate land is something that will capture the hearts of dwarves and even other creatures, I'm sure. Your plumbing system, your electricity, this beer, the game of baseball, and most of all, the atmosphere and feel of this village. I am sure that everyone would want to experience this in their life. Us too. If it was possible, then we would want to live in this place forever. Michael looked at Thrain and saw the pained expression on his face. What do you mean? Why can't you stay here in our village? Thrain sighed and looked up at the stars. It is not that simple, Michael. Even though we are on the outskirts of the Dwarven Kingdom, we are still part of it nonetheless. We cannot simply leave our responsibilities to our kind. What responsibilities? Michael asked. Our village is the very first defensive line of the kingdom. Now that it is destroyed, then it is our responsibility to build it back up. So, once time has passed and the landslide poses no more problem for us, then we will have to return to our village to rebuild it by hand, Thrain explained. This was a hard decision for Thrain. Even though they had only been in this village for a day, they found themselves deeply attracted to its culture and lifestyle. It was extremely hard to part ways with this village now that they discovered how amazing it was. But they pledged an oath to the kingdom itself. Betraying it would be tantamount to ripping out their own heart. Michael thought for a second and found a solution. What if we build a defensive line in place of the village? He said. What do you mean? You said that your village is the first line of defense for the kingdom, right? What if we build a wall instead? It would serve a defensive purpose for the kingdom, which means that you won't betray your oath and still live here permanently. Thrain thought Michael was simply offering a thoughtless solution, but the sincerity in his eyes told him otherwise. Michael was serious. We appreciate your kindness, but we can't let you and this village bear that burden. Creating that defensive wall would take months upon months of hard work. Not to mention the distance between this village and the Dwarven Kingdom. It simply isn't possible. Michael chuckled, almost offended that Thrain would think that such a simple job would take more than a few days' worth of work. Please, you underestimate our construction prowess. Isn't that right, Kong? The inebriated Kong slowly got up from under the table and nodded his head. A simple wall? That would take 4 days, max. Kong bragged. We have about 20 construction hobmankeys available for this project, said Lolo, wiping the foam out of his mouth. But for such a simple project, I doubt we need more than 10. Thrain looked at the three of them and couldn't believe what they were saying. A defensive wall taking less than 4 days? That was absurd. Even the best and fastest craftsmen in the Dwarven Kingdom would need a month at least. I appreciate your gesture, but I do not think it is possible, at least not at the level that we dwarves consider acceptable. Thrain thought that Michael and the others would create a simple wooden wall. After all, that was the only thing they could create in 4 days. To convince him, Michael pointed at the floor underneath their feet. Thrain, do you think the ground is sturdy enough to be considered a good wall? He asked. Thrain looked at the floor and tested its durability with a single stomp of his foot. After hearing the dull sound it produced, he knew that this ground could indeed make for a great wall. But this is made out of stone, is it not? Asked Thrain. I doubt you could carve out a stone wall within a month, much less 4 days, as you said. Michael smiled smugly. Kong, tell him. Kong cleared his throat and said, only 1 day. This ground used to be made out of mud and soil, but we were able to make it like this within one day. Thrain got up from his seat, with the shock immediately turning him sober. The next day, Thrain woke up with a splitting headache. He could hardly believe what he heard yesterday. If he wasn't as clear-headed as he was now, then he would have thought that he dreamed the whole conversation he had with Michael and the others. Making a stone wall in a matter of a few days? Thrain knew this was impossible. Yet, Michael was sure that they could do it. So sure, in fact, that they invited him and the other dwarves to witness the creation of concrete with their own eyes. As the sun slowly rose in the air, the dwarves all gathered near the outskirts of the village, where everything was still under construction. As more and more mankeys found their way to this village, they had to constantly expand their territory to accommodate the 500,000 hobmankeys living in their village. Michael, Kong, Lolo, and the rest of the engineer hobmankeys gathered at the boundary between concrete flooring and the natural soil flooring of the parched lands. There were metal rods inserted on the next part of the land that were going to turn into concrete flooring, making it much more stabler. There was a strange metal contraption in the middle of the construction zone, with its shape like a barrel with its top open. And, through electricity, it was constantly rotating at a fixed speed. Is the concrete inside that metal? Thrain asked. Michael nodded his head. What is that for? Is that needed for the process? The dwarves asked. No, Kong answered. As taught to us by our boss, we need to constantly move the concrete, or else it will harden too fast. Thrain and the dwarves showed a look of disbelief and doubt. Concrete dried so fast that they need that contraption to keep it in a liquid state? It sounded absurd. If you have any questions, you can just ask me. Kong and the others will start the construction, Michael said, signaling for them to start the demonstration. Upon Michael's instruction, the engineers began their work. They began pouring the concrete mixture onto its designated dent on the ground. Kong used his skill, which allowed him to project a visual image of the plan into reality. A finished project overlaid onto the empty space, allowing the workers to implement the design much easier than before. With the combination of a few other skills from the engineers, they were able to pour the concrete on the ground and create a very flat surface with designs and flourishes that represented the village's customs the best. The dwarves watched on, unable to even utter a word as the hobmankeys worked with speed and efficiency they had never seen before. They didn't even have to talk to know what each other's work was supposed to be. They just knew it intuitively. Explore more adventures at Empire. After an hour, this section of the village finally had concrete flooring. They just needed to construct houses next, and they could be inhabited by other hobmankeys. How are they working so fast? And their magic, it perfectly fits their job so well. This kind of fine craft would take at least more than a day for a dwarven craftsman to replicate. I can see now how they are confident in their speed of construction. Thrain approached Michael and admitted his mistake. You are right, Michael. The speed in which you create these roads is unprecedented, he said genuinely. Michael shook his head. The real magic hasn't even started yet. Now it's time for the concrete to set and dry. Thrain looked at Michael, a bit confused. What do you mean? That would take a long time, no? For what he could see, the concrete was still wet and malleable. From his estimation, it would take at least a day for it to completely harden, which was still very impressive. No, we don't have to wait that long, Michael said. A little spell is all we need. He raised his hand, with the elemental mana flowing around his body. His supreme skill, mana gathering, allowed him to see the individual chemical reactions taking place inside the very concrete itself. Using a simple spell, Michael manipulated the mana in his surroundings to slowly harden the concrete in the ground. After a few seconds, it was done. Michael walked to the newly set ground and found himself on solid footing. He stomped, feeling the ground resist the force with a degree of hardness that satisfied his standards. It's done, he said to Thrain. Thrain, partly believing and disbelieving what happened, slowly walked towards Michael before his boots stepped foot onto the concrete ground. He half expected his foot to set an indent on the concrete, but it didn't. It was as hard as stone. Finally, he put his entire body weight on the concrete. It's true, he muttered to himself. In just one day, no, in just a few hours, they were able to make something even harder than stone. The other dwarves couldn't rein in their curiosities and stepped onto the concrete as well. Finally, they believed Michael's claims of creating a wall in a matter of a few days. It was no exaggeration and was probably even a conservative estimate. They could probably create the wall in less than 2 days. They couldn't believe it. This material called concrete completely transformed everything they knew about construction. With this concrete, the entire Dwarven Kingdom could recover from the aftermath of the landslide in less than a month. Thrain faced Michael with a pleading expression. "Help us construct the wall," he said. Michael smiled. That was no question. A group of 10 Hobmanki engineers readied themselves for the journey back to the Dwarven Kingdom. Michael, Thrain, and a few other dwarves accompanied them on a separate wagon. Behind them were a couple more automobiles, each carrying a large stock of concrete for the job. After a few days of traveling, they finally reached the remnants of Thrain's village. It was still devastated by the landslide, but at least the muddy water had subsided for now. Michael floated above the entire territory, surveying everything in his surroundings. Below him were his engineers and the dwarves. Finally, he nodded. "Let's start." The construction progressed quite easily, with the dwarves and the Hobmankis working together to clean up all the debris and wreckage in the area. By the time they were finished, the whole place was nothing more than a bald spot in the middle of the forest. Thrain and the dwarves felt a little bit sentimental once they saw the empty plot of land that they once called home. But it was gone now. They couldn't take it back. Finally, they began the construction of a wall that would be more than 10 meters tall and spanned from one side of the mountain to the other. Their village was located in a deep valley, making it a critical spot for the Dwarven Kingdom's defenses. Many intruders would find it easy to infiltrate the rest of the kingdom once they bypassed the destroyed village. But with this wall, they would cut off any attempts from the intruders. If they wanted to get through to the kingdom, they would have to go through the treacherous terrain of the mountains. By constructing this wall, Thrain and the villagers would fulfill their responsibility to the kingdom, which would give them the freedom to stay in Michael's village for the foreseeable future. They prepared enough concrete for the project, with everything being stored on a concrete mixer installed on the back of the automobiles. With Michael supervising everything in the project, everything went as smoothly as they planned. By the end of the second day, they were able to create a 10-meter wall that would prevent an army from easily passing through the Dwarven Kingdom. Thrain and the dwarves were officially free from their oath. Meanwhile, further inside the Dwarven Kingdom, a few dwarves were making the journey out to try and find refuge in the unknown. Just like Thrain's village, these dwarves also lost their homes to the devastating landslide that affected almost half of the Dwarven Kingdom. Because of that, famine and homelessness spread around the entire Dwarven community. The capital, where the Dwarven King resided, experienced an overpopulation that caused a lot of chaos in the kingdom. These dwarves didn't want to further exacerbate the problems in the capital, so they decided to venture outwards to find their own temporary refuge. Although they wanted to rebuild their village, their forges and their smithing materials were all destroyed in the landslide. And even if they had their proper materials, they would all be forced to work on restoring the kingdom's walls first and foremost before they could restore their village. With no choice left, all the men decided to search for a better place outside their kingdom. This group of dwarves knew that there was still another village on the very outskirts of the kingdom, so they visited it in an attempt to make contact with their village for cooperation. But instead of seeing the remnants of a destroyed village, this group of dwarves saw nothing but an empty space in the middle of the valley. There were no debris and no destruction scattered about, as if the landslide hadn't affected it in the first place. "Did the Dwarven King order for this village to be cleaned?" asked one of the dwarves. "No, he's too busy dealing with the capital. And last I heard, he's allocating all workers to rebuild the wall. They don't have enough workers to clean up this village," answered another dwarf. A different dwarf from the back of the group couldn't believe his eyes as well. "This doesn't make sense," he said in disbelief. "I visited this place 2 days ago, and it was still full of mud and debris." The rest of the dwarves didn't believe his words. Where did you get enough ale to mess up your brain this much? There's no way it's possible to clean up all that mess in 2 days, said one dwarf. No, it's true. I was there with him, and it is as he says. There were even remnants of the village still left standing. But now everything's gone. After hearing another dwarf recount what he saw, the rest of them began to get suspicious. Slowly, they walked forward to see what became of the village that used to be on the very outskirts of their kingdom. As they got closer, they finally saw it, a 10-meter-tall wall with a grainy white color, standing grandly between the two mountains by their side. They couldn't believe their eyes. Not only was the entire landslide wiped off the entire plot of land, but a giant wall suddenly spawned out of nowhere as well. Their minds immediately tried to reason this through supernatural means, like a god of dwarves descending into the lands and constructing this wall as a form of pity for them. After all, no human, dwarf, or creature could create this grand structure in a matter of less than 2 days. That would be absurd. Just then, one of the dwarves caught sight of a simple wooden house near the wall. Judging from the campfire lit up by its side, they knew that the cabin was occupied. Explore stories on Empire. They slowly approached it until they saw a single dwarf cooking meat on the campfire and drinking some sort of beverage in a cup. As they approached, most of them recognized the lone dwarf. Thrain, is that you? One of them asked. Thrain welcomed the group into his cabin as if he had been expecting them for quite some time. Yes, it's me. Come in and make yourselves comfortable, Thrain said. The dwarves all entered his cabin and couldn't help but question him immediately about what happened to their village. Enlighten us as to what is going on. Why is your village gone without a trace? What happened to the others? Where did that stone wall come from? They asked Thrain. In response, Thrain smiled and carefully explained everything that happened to him. How he met Michael and how the human invited them all to his village in the parched lands. He was forthcoming with them, telling them nothing but the truth. After all, the very reason why he stayed behind in the first place was exactly for this encounter. He wanted to invite more dwarves to live in Michael's village. Is there really such a place like that? It sounds too good to be true. And you mean to say that they made that big wall in just under 2 days? Impossible. Are you of sound mind, Thrain? Are you sure that the tragedy of this landslide hasn't damaged your mental faculties? Of course, the dwarves couldn't believe Thrain's description of Michael's village in the parched lands. This paradise sounded more like a dream than something that happened in reality. If that is true, brothers, then you too must be imagining the wall built upon this village. Everything I said is even truer than the fact that we dwarves have ale in our blood. Thrain affirmed. Stay tuned for updates on Empire. The dwarves, although skeptical, decided to believe Thrain's words for now and check out this magical paradise for themselves. If it was only a product of Thrain's imagination, then they would try to help him recover from his delusion. Take us to this oasis in the desert, the dwarves said, to which Thrain nodded with satisfaction. He was 100% sure that they would soon get enamored with the village's customs and culture once they saw it for themselves. Truthfully, Thrain was starting to get guilty after experiencing happiness in the village. He knew that there were still a lot more unfortunate dwarves affected by the landslide who had no food or hammer to their name. It sounded unfair that they were the only ones to experience such little joys in life like beer and baseball. We must make our way towards the parched lands immediately, for it will take more than a month's worth of travel, said the dwarves. But Thrain knew that there was a better and much faster way of getting to the village. He looked down at the shadow on his feet and mumbled the words, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Suddenly, a bulbous figure made out of violet slime emerged out of his shadow, taking the form of Michael's trusty old pet, Fudge. You rang for me, Thrain-san asked Fudge. Yes, Fudge Dano. Because Fudge was influenced by a lot of anime tropes, he always insisted that he be addressed as Fudge Dano or Fudge-kun. Thrain respected the slime, so he accommodated his request consistently. We're going to need the automobiles to take us to the village, Thrain said, introducing the other dwarves to Fudge. Okay, I'll be sending them now. And just like Fudge said, the automobiles arrive at the other side of the wall in just a few hours. The dwarves, just like Thrain when he first saw it, expressed their shock when the story about the horseless carriage turned out to be true. You should hold off on your surprises until after you see what the village has to offer, Thrain said to the speechless dwarves. He assisted them into the automobile, but he didn't go with them. Instead, Thrain decided to stay near the walls so that he would be able to spread the news about the village to other dwarves. Once they arrived at the village, the dwarves were quickly welcomed by the almost native dwarves of the village. First of all, they were given their own houses to sleep in temporarily, which were equipped with both a plumbing system and electrical wiring. Then once they were settled in, the new dwarves were brought up to speed with everything there was to see in the village, including the farms, the accommodations, the public hot springs, and most importantly, the baseball fields where some of the dwarves were playing with the hobmankeys. The dwarves, of course, had also made a baseball team of their own called the Dwarven Miners, and quickly proved themselves to be one of the best teams in the entire village. Their short stature allowed them to have a smaller strike zone, meaning pitchers would always have trouble with their balls. "Ah, good. New recruits," said the dwarf team captain. "Come and warm up with us. We need to beat the chefs this time around." After a day of the dwarves immersing themselves into the culture of the village, they quickly understood why Thrain said that this was one of the best places to live in among the entire world. Everything in this village was free, including housing, water, electricity, food, and everything else they needed to survive. This meant that they could fully enjoy what life had to offer without worrying about where they were going to find their next meal. The best part was that everyone worked together to keep this village into the paradise it was now. Each of them, including the dwarves that made this village their home, contributed something to the table. Whether it was smithing, crafting, or maybe even brewing beer, everyone had a job to do. One of the dwarves even had the brilliant idea of constructing a tavern for everyone to drink in when the night came. With Michael's approval, the dwarf enlisted the help of Kong and a few others to make the tavern's design a mix of both cultures, while still maintaining a little bit of dwarven design. This tavern became the place where all of them gathered at night, drinking while making fun of each other's bad game during the baseball matches. I know my parents would strike me down for this, but I think beer tastes better than ale. You know, after tasting this cold beer, I just might agree with you. This is the life. Playing baseball and kicking it back with a couple of cold ones, said one particular dwarf, whose beard wasn't as bushy as the others. You're not the one to say that, Baldric. Even though you've been here for 2 days now, you still don't have anything to contribute to this village, teased his dwarf friend, to which a lot of dwarves and hobmankeys chuckled to themselves after hearing. I'm trying to find something I'm good at, Baldric tried to explain, but I have no other talent except drinking this beer. Just then, one of the dwarves had an idea form in his head. What if you become the one to sell this beer to the Dwarven Kingdom? Baldric immediately stood up, almost knocking over the table and spilling all the drinks. You're right, this beer will definitely become popular within our kingdom. If I sell this beer to all the drinkers I know, then I can bring in a lot of money for this village. The dwarf didn't waste any more time and immediately visited Michael's house in the middle of the night. Thankfully, Michael was still awake as he was busy with a project of his. He welcomed the dwarf and listened to his proposal. You want to sell beer to the Dwarven Kingdom? I thought that all forms of outside business are forbidden. Michael asked. It was a widely known fact that the Dwarven Kingdom refused any peddlers to enter their kingdom. And as far as he knew, even the great Eyes Vanderbilt was unable to break through that restriction. Yes, sir, but there are always exceptions. There's a black market where illegal goods are traded within the kingdom, where dwarves sell products from outside the kingdom, Baldric explained. Michael thought about it for a second. Are you sure you can do this? Baldric struck his chest in pride. I know everything there is to know about the black market, sir. I've frequented it a lot of times in search of good ale, like most dwarves, and I'm sure that beer will easily sell within that community. Michael thought this was a good idea. He had been thinking of a way for the Reborn company to spread to the Dwarven Kingdom this whole time. However, it was hard because Castell was a human and would be denied entry before she could even get close. But with an inside man like Baldric, they wouldn't have to worry about infiltration. They would be able to sell beer to the Dwarven Kingdom and open the doors for even more Reborn products to be sold there. I like this idea of yours, Michael complimented him. I want you to coordinate with Castell and Lolo about this. Castell will help you with purchasing the materials needed to package the beer into a glass bottle that's easy to transport. We will need to make more barley for the beer, so we need Anne's help to expand the barley farms. Lolo will know the right workers who will help with creating the beer, packaging it, and transporting it to the kingdom. After the beer enters the kingdom, you will be the one in charge of selling it. If you need the other dwarves to help you, then you can ask for their help. Baldric was starting to get excited at the prospect of selling beer to the Dwarven Kingdom. This was the first time he was given such a large responsibility, but Michael trusted him with it without even doubting his ability. He saluted Michael. "I will make this successful, sir." And just as Baldric was about to leave the room, he suddenly remembered something. "Oh, right, sir. What would you want to exchange the beer for?" he asked. "Experience more on Empire." Michael was a little bit confused with the question. Doesn't the Dwarven Kingdom use gold coins as their currency as well? Yes, sir. But the black market works a little bit differently. Most of the things sold, they're a product from the outside world. So, the dwarves opt to sell it through bartering instead of gold coins. Some of them sell it for gems, trinkets, weapons, or even stonework. But what's most popular in the black market is something that everyone in the world seeks to obtain. For example, Elven ale is mostly exchanged for a metal called Damascus, which can only be produced by us dwarves. This makes Damascus steel extremely valuable to the outside world, which dwarves sell for a lot of gold to other civilizations. This is the reason why a lot of dwarves make their living through the black market, Baldric explained. Damascus? Michael asked, intrigued at this new material. This metal is a specialty for us dwarves, Baldric said, with a bit of his dwarven pride leaking out of his voice. It is the most durable material on the planet while being even more lightweight than steel or iron. It has a lot of properties as well that make it one of the most sought-after materials in the world. Michael's brain began to work as he imagined all of his inventions becoming reinforced with Damascus steel. If Damascus steel was as good as Baldric said it was, then he could finally create a lot of new inventions that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to create. Get all the Damascus steel you can bargain for, Michael told Baldric. Getting Damascus steel in exchange for beer was the best deal he could make in this situation. That steel was even more valuable than gold coins since he could earn as much as he wanted from selling Reborn products in the entire world, but he would only get Damascus from the Dwarven Kingdom. And he could always sell Damascus steel as a Reborn product as well. You got it, sir. I'll make sure to barter for the most Damascus steel I can get. More days passed, and even more batches of dwarves made their way to the village. Thrain became sort of a recruiter in the Dwarven Kingdom, spreading the word to all affected villagers that there was a safe haven in the parched lands. Most of them lost their entire livelihood in the landslide, so they were desperate enough to take the chance. Slowly, the population of the village grew to even greater heights, expanding further outwards. Meanwhile, Baldric and the Hobmankeys worked tirelessly as they began the production of beer, which was now renamed Reborn beer. Michael had to create more and more automobiles for transport. Each could carry hundreds of crates of beer. Finally, the first shipment of beer departed from the village and made its way to the Dwarven Kingdom. After a few days, they finally arrived in the Dwarven Kingdom at an undisclosed cave hidden in the mountains. This was where the black market operated. Baldric entered the cave and saw the bustling market inside. Dwarves were shouting at customers to try and entice them to buy a new product from the outside world. This made the place extremely noisy. But contrary to their tactics, Baldric simply just set up a table and took out a cold bottle of beer. Then, he just drank and enjoyed beer silently. After a few seconds, somebody took the bait. "Brother, what is it you're drinking right there?" a passerby dwarf asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "Oh, this," Baldric said, as sloshed the liquid in his cup. "This is called beer. Would you care to try it?" The curious dwarf took the first sip of beer, and the rest was history. His excited shout and relieved exhale upon drinking this mysterious cold beverage garnered a couple more curious dwarves to approach Baldric's table. Of course, Baldric didn't hesitate to give them a free taste of beer. And as expected, those dwarves immediately became enamored with the refreshing taste of the alcoholic drink. Since these dwarves were used to much more potent drinks like ale, they all treated beer as if it were water in a desert. This made them extremely prone to becoming addicted to beer. They wanted to drown themselves in it, clamoring for Baldric to give them another bottle. Brother, this Reborn beer is amazing. I'll give you a full crate of pure steel for a crate of this beer. Me too, brother. I'm willing to part ways with a handful of full clarity gems for 10 crates of Reborn beer. As they shouted their requests, this drew more and more dwarves in to look at all the commotion happening at Baldric's table. At this point, he was the only vendor in the black market where his customers were the ones shouting to buy his products. All the other dwarves shouted at the customers just to get their attention on what they were selling. But not Baldric. The customers were the ones doing all the marketing for him. It was like a virus that spread among the dwarves. Each of them was lured in by curiosity, and Baldric satisfied it by giving them all a free taste of beer. And once they got a taste of this cold beer down their throats, they too got caught up in the frenzy to buy as much beer as they could. This type of tactic was taught by Michael. He suggested to Baldric to give his customers a free bottle of beer, which might seem too much, but it worked in getting the dwarves to buy a whole crate for themselves. "I'll buy your whole stock," said one dwarf. "That's unfair. I'm fine if I just get 100 crates of bottles for myself." "Hey, I got here first. If anything, I should be the first one to buy out the whole booth." The dwarves were in uproar, bargaining higher and higher prices for the beer, without even Baldric saying anything about its price. "Brothers," Baldric finally spoke up, "we are willing to trade beer for any metal or precious trinkets that you can offer. However, we are prioritizing deals that are made in one currency, Damascus steel." Upon saying those words, the dwarves went silent. "I have it. I can give you a kilo for each crate." "Me too. I can give you 100 kilos of Damascus steel right now." "Wait, can I reserve crates for myself? I have a lot of Damascus steel in stock, but it's on my forge." Baldric smiled as he saw this. Finally, the Reborn beer was in business. In a matter of a few hours, Baldric's entire stock was cleaned out by various buyers. Michael had him implement a 10-crate limit for each dwarf, meaning they couldn't buy in bulk and let the other dwarves have a chance to buy it for themselves. Michael knew that the spread of Reborn beer hinged on word of mouth. If only a small number of dwarves had their hands on Reborn beer, it wouldn't spread quite as fast as they wanted it to. And just as Michael predicted, the first night after Reborn beer was sold in the black market, the taverns began stocking their shelves with this new product. "Say, good brother, what is that new product you have there? That doesn't look like ale," a dwarf asked, leaning over the table to point at the conspicuous bottle of beer displayed among the best Alash in their stock. One of his friends turned to look at the bottle and recognized the name stamped on the front. "Wait a minute, Reborn beer? I think I've heard that before. What is it? I heard that this alcohol is making waves all over the dwarven community. It's a hot topic right now. I've heard that even royals want a piece for themselves." The dwarf, upon hearing this, couldn't help but want to satisfy his curiosity. "If even those picky dwarves like it, then I want to see what it tastes like." The dwarf bought the bottle, took a sip, and was addicted in one go. "Bartender, where can I get more of this beer? This is a revelation." The bartender dwarf looked suspiciously around him as if he didn't want others to hear his next words. "Rumor is," the bartender whispered, "you can get all the beer you want if you travel to the parched lands and seek out the paradise within it. That's not all. I heard there's experience more content on Empire." The dwarves listening to the bartender's story couldn't help but gasp at the insane stories about this supposed village in the middle of the desert. "I've only heard about this because I have a friend who went to the village himself. And after he returned here, he praised it to no end. He's not even the first eyewitness to come forward with commendations for this village," the bartender added. The dwarven friend group all looked at each other, with their eyes showing their intent to visit this magical place. And so, that was how Reborn got slowly filled with more and more dwarves either permanently moving to the village or just visiting it for a good time. Meanwhile, Baldric finally returned to the village, with the automobiles filled with carts and carts of a mysterious silver and black metal called Damascus steel. This was perhaps the first time someone was able to smuggle this much Damascus steel out of the Dwarven Kingdom. And it all landed in the pockets of a 10-year-old child with a penchant for making strange inventions. "This is all the steel I've gathered, boss," Baldric said, presenting the Damascus to Michael. "Good. Thank you for your work." Michael complimented the dwarf. "Now, it's my turn to make good use of this." Michael always had a lot of projects in mind ever since he arrived in this desert. However, the lack of materials he had available always prevented him from bringing these ideas out into the real world. But now, he had Damascus steel, a material known for its strength, durability, and flexibility. According to the dwarven smiths he consulted, Damascus steel could be fashioned into an extremely thin or small piece without destroying its integrity. This was perfect for creating complex and intricate projects that could only be done in his previous life through large, complex machinery. For example, it would completely improve the current design of the automobile, allowing it to become a lot faster and more durable without adding a lot of weight to the vehicle. Not only that, but the main engine itself could finally be upgraded. Michael's current iteration of the engine was still bulky and unrefined compared to the automobiles he had in his previous life. But now, Damascus steel allowed him to finally reach the standards of modern cars, while also improving it by a tiny bit. After all, Damascus steel was a much better material than the metals they had in his previous world, meaning that he could even surpass those supercars in the future. Of course, it would take a little bit more time before that was possible. However, there was one thing he could achieve right now. He looked down at his shadow, communicating with his clone attached to Castell's shadow. "Castell, can you hear me?" Michael asked. "Yes, young master. I can hear you just fine," the shadow at his feet replied, vibrating to match the sound of Castell's voice. With the cloning ability he learned from Fudge, Michael was able to communicate with Castell even from a very long distance, replicating a radio or a telephone from his previous world. "There's been a change in plans. We've been making preparations for selling concrete, right?" "Yes," Castell replied. "The road connecting the parched lands and the Vanderbilt estate has finally been finished. This means that we can finally distribute concrete to the public market." Michael nodded. "But that's not all we're going to do. Young master, are you planning some kind of market-breaking scheme again?" Castell had known Michael for a long time, and even if she couldn't see his face, she knew that there was a playful yet devious smile on his face right now. "I want to start selling automobiles." Castell was so surprised that she almost fell out of her chair. "Really, young master? You're finally going to bring out the automobile to the general public?" She knew firsthand how revolutionary the automobile had been for their company alone. It was able to transport their inventory at the fastest pace, turning a month-long delivery into just 1 week. She could only imagine how much this would change the landscape of commerce in this country. She reckoned that there would be a lot of companies wanting to buy multiples for their businesses to boost sales by at least half. They would be able to sell this automobile at any price they wanted, even making it one of the most expensive pieces of craft in the world, and people would still buy it. This would entice both the professional and general public, making their everyday travel with an automobile instead of carriage. "Young master, isn't it better if we wait a couple more months to a year before we sell the automobile? We should let the concrete become more widely used before we announce this new machine," Castell argued. But Michael knew that his way was better. "No, we need to sell the automobile and the concrete at the same time." And before he could even finish his sentence, Castell's skill, Golden Nose, made her realize the potential of this idea. "I see, young master. If we show off how easily concrete could be used to construct roads, then we can package the two of them together. They need to construct flat roads for the cars to truly show their worth. So, they would want to buy both concrete and automobiles at the same time." She began to see the possibilities of this business and all the money that they would rake in. But perhaps the best thing they would earn was another newsworthy story about Reborn's new revolutionary invention. This would give them enough fame to break through to the Queen's region. "I'll work on this project, young master. We'll have everything prepared by the time you finish the production of both products," Castell said, excitement spilling out of tone. Michael noticed her eagerness and had to calm her down. She was already overworked from her current workload. This would push her over the edge. This is a big job, and you're already handling a lot of stuff in the company. Don't worry, I'll be sending you some talented hobmankeys to help in the company. Michael found quite a few hobmankeys with talents and skills related to business. Although they weren't quite as good as Castell, they were still talented enough to be able to lift a lot of burden from her shoulders. Thank you, young master. I'll look forward to my recruits, she said, heaving a sigh of relief. Michael bid goodbye and cut off his communication with Castell. He needed to plan for the business venture, experience more tales on Empire. Concrete was easy to make, but automobiles were a completely different breed. Thankfully, there were currently a lot of dwarves in the village who specialized in metallurgy. He just had to ask them for help. Meanwhile, in the capital of the Dwarven Kingdom, located at the base of a volcanic mountain, the Dwarven King sat on his throne and massaged the creases on his forehead. "What is the problem now?" he asked his advisors. The meek dwarves kneeling on the red carpet looked up at their king and said, "There's been a suspiciously low amount of ale being purchased, sir." The king froze for a second and faced his advisors with a serious look. "Dwarves are not purchasing ale? That is suspicious." They were known for having ale in their blood, so this news was cause for concern. "Have you found out why?" he asked. His advisors nodded their heads and signaled for a servant to bring out a single bottle of Reborn beer. "From what we observed, the dwarves seem to be addicted to this new beverage called beer," they explained. The king, curious as to how something could be better than ale, decided to pop the top open and drink it himself. And as soon as he did, his eyes widened and his pupils dilated. His reaction wasn't much different from any other dwarf that drank their first beer. He, too, fell in love at first sip. "This is good," exclaimed the Dwarven King. His advisors immediately spoke up, alarmed at his statement. "Sir, this is ruining the local ale market in our kingdom. This is an illegal good." The Dwarven King, realizing his mistake, awkwardly coughed and tried to backtrack his words. Right, this is an illegal good. That was what I meant to say." He wasn't supposed to like beer because he was the voice of the Dwarven people. He was supposed to support only the products made by his fellow dwarves. That was how it has always been and always will be. He was supposed to have an intense hatred against the outside world and everything they produced. However, he couldn't help but look at the bottle in his hands with eyes of longing. Even now, all he could think about was getting another sip of this beer. "Are you sure this isn't a product of dwarves?" "Gulp, this is surely from the mind of a genius dwarf," the king said, casually taking another sip from the bottle. "By the way, is this all that you have confiscated? If you have more, give it here, so that I can inspect it a couple more times for scientific purposes, of course." His advisors looked at him with worry. It looked like their king himself was caught up in the beer fever spreading around their kingdom. The king waved off their concern. "Besides that, how is the overpopulation within our capital? Are there still a lot of refugees looking for a new home?" Ever since the landslide, all the dwarves affected by it flocked to the capital of their kingdom, turning it overpopulated overnight. Explore more at Empire. Knowing that there were lives at stake, the king ordered his people to solve this problem immediately, turning rarely used forges into temporary homes for those dwarves. All this extra work became the reason why the work on walls was delayed for such a long time. He thought it was going well, but when he looked at his advisors, he saw their unsure faces. "Is it bad news or good news?" he asked them. His advisors looked at each other, not knowing if what they had was good news or not. "Your Highness, from what we could see, there's no longer an overpopulation problem within our capital. Is that not a good thing?" he asked, confused as to why they were not celebrating. "But sir, this is not due to our efforts. From what we have heard, the dwarves are all moving outside our kingdom," his advisors explained. "Have you found where they went?" the king asked, and his advisors nodded. "Yes, sire. They seem to have moved into a village in the parched lands." He sat back down on his throne and thought for a second. They moved there? Permanently? But what about their responsibility to the kingdom, to their fellow dwarves? They cannot let their positions unguarded for long. The villages surrounding the kingdom played an important role in their defense. Without them, it would be much easier for them to be sieged. But before his advisors could answer, the double doors to the throne room suddenly burst wide open as another dwarf, wearing the same royal attire as the king's advisors, hurried inside panting. "Your Highness!" "Ah, check, I have come with news." The king welcomed the dwarf in, letting him sit among his advisors. "What has caused you to be in such distress? Tell me." The dwarf steadied his breath before finally speaking. "I have come back after surveying the outskirts of our kingdom, as you commanded me, Your Highness. When I arrived there, I saw something impossible." The dwarf then took out a scroll from his pockets and presented it to his king. "This is a wall," the king muttered as he observed the sketch on the parchment paper. It showed an elaborate wall structure, 10 meters tall and sturdy enough to repel a cavalry. "That is right, Your Highness. When I traveled to the outskirts, I came across these thick and strong walls that had suddenly sprung up from where our villages were supposed to be. And that is not even the most surprising part. From what I have gathered, this wall seemed to have been built within just a few days, 2 days at the most." His words sent gasps throughout the throne room. They could hardly believe that such an elaborate wall structure could be built within just a few days. As craftsmen themselves, they knew the difficulties it would take to rush such a job, and from their estimates, this wall could only be constructed within a month. 2 days. That cannot be. Preposterous. There is no magical or physical way to create such an elaborate wall within just a few days. "How can you be sure that the walls were made within 2 days?" the king asked. "Your Highness, that wall wasn't there when I visited it 2 days ago." There are also a lot of dwarves who saw the construction themselves, swearing to their kidneys that the walls were indeed built within 2 nights using a strange new liquid material that hardened within a few hours. The king and his advisors were still skeptical about this story, but they knew that the dwarf was a man of his word. There wasn't any motive for him to lie, especially to the king. "Have you investigated who created these walls?" the advisors asked. "Yes. I happened upon one dwarf who lived alone near the outskirts named Thrain. He said that the walls are constructed so that the dwarves can leave the kingdom without having to betray their oath to protect it. Your Highness, it seems that the dwarves are permanently moving to a village in the parched lands, where food, water, housing, and beer are as free as the air we breathe today." Once he heard that, the dwarven king stood up from his throne and stared at the dwarf with serious intensity. "That village, it's where beer was made?" the king asked. The dwarf nodded meekly, thinking that he had done something wrong. "How dare they?" the king's voice thundered. "How dare they hog all the beer to themselves?" "I wanted to." "Huh? Your Highness, did you say something else?" his advisors asked. The king ignored his advisor's query. "It is decided. I shall visit this village for myself and see what it has to offer that we cannot," the king said with a smile on his face, leaving his advisors to shake their heads in disappointment. Their king's intent was as clear as day. He just wanted to drink beer. Despite his advisors' pleas for him to change his mind, the dwarven king still went ahead with his plans to infiltrate the village. For safety reasons, he disguised himself through magic to seem like a normal dwarf. His taller stature slowly became shorter, his fiery eyebrows became tamer, and the intricate beard braid that covered half his face untangled itself to become free-flowing down to his knees. All the characteristics of his royal dwarven blood were gone, turning him into a normal, honest dwarf. Anyone who gazed at the dwarven king would feel as if he was just like any other. Case in point, the dwarven king approached a single wooden hut in the middle of the forest and knocked on Thrain's door. "Is anybody?" the dwarven king roared. But he quickly realized that his voice was too intimidating, so he had to change his tone. "Is anybody here?" Thrain came out of the cabin and welcomed the new dwarf. "Hello. Have you come to find paradise in the parched lands? What is your name?" The dwarven king coughed and thought of the first thing in his mind. "My name is Byru, and yes, I seek the place where beer is plenty." Thrain laughed to himself. Byru was perhaps the 100th dwarf that came running to his cottage this week alone. The spread of beer within the kingdom opened the dwarves' eyes to Michael's village so much faster than even he could accommodate. "You are lucky," Thrain said as he patted the dwarven king's back with a smack. The automobile is just about to arrive. A couple of minutes later, a loud beep-beep resounded through the forest, signaling the automobile's arrival on the other side of the wall. Thrain escorted Byru to the wall, letting the Dwarven King set his eyes on the magnificent white concrete wall towering over the trees. Amazing, Byru commented. Thrain explained to him about this new material called concrete and how it was used to construct these sturdy walls within just a few days. By the way, are you from any villages on the outskirts of the kingdom? If so, then you can tell us so that we can build another wall in place of the destroyed settlement, Thrain asked, but Byru said there was no need. Finally, they caught sight of the automobile, surprising the Dwarven King. It was a square metal structure that had no horse, yet could run as fast as one. So this is the automobile. And strangely enough, the driver controlling this strange vehicle was a dwarf. Thrain, another recruit? The dwarf asked as he opened the door. Yup, thanks for picking him up. Thrain guided Byru to the automobile and returned to his post, waiting for the next batch of dwarves that needed help. The automobile began to drive, and the Dwarven King couldn't help but stare at the dwarf driving the automobile. He was astonished at how a dwarf was so integrated into the village's culture that he was the one driving this vehicle. Dwarves hated being away from their forges for too long, yet this one voluntarily did so. This is the only way I can contribute to the village, explained the dwarf. The Dwarven King heard that no one was forced to work in that village, yet everyone was working even harder than ever. It didn't make sense to him. He became so much more curious as to how the village operated to make the dwarves act like this. A couple of days later, Byru, the Dwarven King, finally arrived at the paradise in the parched lands. He could only stand in wonder at this strange civilization. Mankeys and dwarves alike walked around the streets with smiles on their faces, as if they were happy all the time in their lives. You must be the new dwarf. Welcome to our village, said a dwarf, wearing strange red clothes. Yes, my name is Byru, the Dwarven King said, holding out his hand for the other dwarf to shake. But instead, Byru felt a smack on his shoulders as the dwarf put his hands around him. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get acclimated with the village quickly. If this was back in the Dwarven Kingdom, the dwarf would have lost his hand for the crime of touching the king. But strangely enough, Byru didn't feel offended. This was the first time someone had actually come close to him without having any reservations, treating him like a normal dwarf. Your journey continues at Empire. First of all, let's go to the baseball field, the dwarf said. Baseball? What is this strange word? It's our game, the dwarf said, pulling on his shirt to show the words Dwarven Miners stitched on the front. Our team finally reached the finals. Byru had no choice as the dwarf forcefully dragged him through the streets. The Dwarven King watched as fellow dwarves and mankeys greeted them as they went past, either through a simple hello or a playful "we'll beat your team tonight." Dwarven and Mankey children played on the streets without a care in the world. They passed through the plaza, where the smell of wonderfully cooked meat wafted through the air. There were stalls placed around the area, all of which served some kind of exotic food that everyone seemed to love. Finally, the dwarf dragged Byru to the baseball field, where a lot of dwarves were warming up for the game. On the way, the Dwarven King was told everything there was to know about baseball, including all the rivalries within the different teams in the village. It was evident from the dwarf that this was a big deal for them. Byru couldn't understand why the dwarves took this little game so seriously when there were other things they could be doing with their days. Hey guys, we have a new dwarf in our midst. Let's give a warm welcome, shall we? The dwarves, all wearing the baseball uniforms and safety gear that Michael made for them, looked at Byru and gave him their warmest welcomes. They immediately started to teach him about baseball, about how to properly hit a ball or pitch it. But Byru still couldn't understand why everyone liked baseball so much. Why are you all acting so serious? Baseball sounds easy, said Byru. The dwarves froze and stared at Byru. For them, this was a sentence that could not be said lightly without having the skill to back it up. Their eyes showed a strange excitement, as if they had something special planned for the little newbie. Byru seemed to have forgotten that he wasn't a king, but a newcomer in this village. He had a lot to learn, and the dwarves were going to teach him, whether he wanted to or not. What the forge? The Dwarven King collapsed on the ground, dead tired, as he crossed the final lap around the entire field. He was gasping for breath, but compared to the other dwarves who were still running more laps, they were barely even breathing loudly. A life-or-death situation for him was nothing but a warm-up for them. Done already, newbie? Ha ha. Funny, talking about baseball is easy. Well, now you know. We'll have to up your training regimen tomorrow. You can barely last one inning. The dwarves were ruthless in their treatment of Byru, letting him experience all the hardships that they regularly went through when they practiced for their games. Not only that, but Byru also became their shuttle, making him do all sorts of chores and fetch quests that completely wore down all the high and mighty attitude that Byru had from being the literal king of the dwarves. This was the first time he had to run from one end of the village to the other, with his hands full of baseball equipment. In other words, the king finally knew the hard work normal people went through in their day-to-day. By the end of the day, Byru was completely exhausted. His body was sore, his mind was tired, and he was just a second away from calling it quits and returning to his kingdom. But then, the game started. At night, when the whole village was supposed to be asleep and covered in darkness, the entire baseball field was instead lit up by these bright lights that made it seem like they had harnessed the power of the sun. He heard the excited shouts and chanting in the bleachers, with every single one of them showing their enthusiasm for the game. What are they shouting at? Byru asked the dwarves. In response, they just smiled at him and patted his back with another resounding smack. They're rooting for me, newbie. The captain of the dwarven miners dragged Byru out of their dugout and presented him to the crowd. The Dwarven King looked around the bleachers and saw 1,000 mankeys and dwarves shouting and cheering with their whole chests, celebrating their entrance to the field. Everyone in the village gathered here, and all of them were cheering, not for him, but for the dwarves who showed great talent in baseball. He could see a few in the crowd who wore the same clothes and uniform as the ace player on their team, showing their reverence and applause to him by copying his attire. The Dwarven King was astounded. There wasn't even this much adoration and cheering when he was crowned king during his coronation. He couldn't believe that a dwarf, who would have been considered normal in their kingdom, was being shown more admiration than a king. "Take this in, newbie," said the captain dwarf. "Once you experience this, you'll never get tired of it. So, if you want to be cheered like them, then you better show your talent in the field." Byru had no words for the captain. Unlike them, he couldn't even run through the 4 plates without getting exhausted. He couldn't even hit any ball with his bat, no matter how slow they threw it at him. He had no chance of becoming as great as their captain. Finally, the game started with the dwarven miners going against the farmer cultivators. Right from the get-go, the competition between the teams was fierce. The dwarves would score home runs after home runs, but the farmers would always come back against them through solid hits that earned them runs. The crowd was swayed easily by this competition, expressing their excitement or disappointment with cheering and shouting. This was the first time the Kings saw something so intense. It felt as if their lives were at stake with this game. When he first heard about baseball, he thought that it wasn't so serious. It was just a game after all. However, as he experienced everything with his own eyes, he could see the passion and dedication each team put onto the field. There were even a couple of times when the Dwarven King couldn't help but slap his knee in disappointment as the referee ruled the player as out as he touched the home base. As the game went on, the king found himself getting more and more invested in the game, cheering and sighing during crucial moments in the game. Finally, in the last inning of the game, the 2 teams were completely tied. The Dwarves had one last chance to break the tie and win the game completely. However, at the very last second, their ace and captain, who scored almost half of their points for the team, suddenly had an accident and injured his knee. "Ark!" The captain groaned, grabbing his leg in pain. The team had to watch as their only hope of winning the game was carried out off the field. Find your next adventure on Empire. Byru felt the air in their dugout change. It was clear that they were completely devastated by this unfortunate incident. They were just 1 inning away from winning their first baseball title. The worst part was that they didn't have any other player in their roster who could replace their captain, except for one. The captain limped toward Byru and gently smacked his shoulders. "You can do it, newbie. You can win us the game," he said. But the Dwarven King was wholly unprepared for this. He was slowly dragged onto the field, bat in hand, clueless as to how he was going to win them a game. The world seemed to turn mute for him. He couldn't hear the cheering from the crowd. He couldn't even hear the shouting from his teammates, warning him that the first ball was about to brush past his body. Deciding to let go of all his worries and all his problems back in the Dwarven Kingdom, Byru decided to just swing the bat as hard as he could. And surprisingly, he felt a heavy force on his bat as the ball collided with it. The ball rose into the air and slowly fell to the outfield. Byru was so surprised that he forgot to run. He was only reminded when all of his teammates in the dugout motioned for him to run as fast as he could. And so he did. He ran to the limits of his physical body. Meanwhile, the ball bounced on the grass field before being picked up by a hobmanki, who threw it towards first base, towards where Byru was running to. In a moment of desperation, the king dove toward the plate, never mind the dirt and mud that would sully his clothes. His hands reached out and touched the plate, almost at the same time that the defender caught the ball in his mitt. They both looked at the referee, who shouted, "Safe." Just then, all sounds returned to the king's ears. All he heard were crazed shouting and cheering from the crowd, much more than when they were first introduced. His dwarf teammates all swarmed towards him, picking him up from the ground and patting the dirt off his uniform. "What are they shouting at?" he asked the dwarfs. His teammate smiled. "They're rooting for you, newbie. You won us the game." As it turned out, his one hit allowed the runner to reach home plate, scoring them 1 point that put them ahead of the other team. Byru was hoisted up by his teammates, tossing him high up in the air in celebration. At the end of the game, they all celebrated his game-winning hit at the tavern, where Hobmanki and Dwarf alike congratulated him for his crucial part in their win. The dwarves that were once so harsh to him had now finally warmed up to Byru. He had earned their respect, and the Dwarven King respected them in return. He finally understood why they all treated the sport as seriously as they did. He understood why they worked hard all day long to prepare their bodies for the physical intensity they had to produce to get a win. They apologized to him, but Byru waved off their concern by pouring them more and more beer. They drank as much as they could. The king didn't think he would be able to increase his love for beer, but the feeling of having his newfound friends and teammates drink and celebrate with him was an entirely new sort of happiness that he wouldn't have found if he hadn't left the confines of his kingdom. Finally, he understood why dwarves preferred to live in this village rather than their kingdom. And in truth, if he didn't have the responsibility to protect the kingdom given to him by his ancestors, then he could see himself living in this village and exploring all the culture that it had to offer. As he looked upon the happy faces of his fellow dwarves, the king finalized a decision in his mind. If he couldn't move here for himself, then he would make sure that all the other dwarves in his kingdom would be able to experience what he felt during this night. He wanted them to be free from the old tradition of closing themselves from the world and explore what life had to offer. So he decided he was going to open his doors for this village. He walked out of the tavern and visited the large estate in the middle of the village. This was where their supposed leader lived. The king felt a little bit nervous as he stood at the gates. This would be the first time he would be meeting someone so legendary. He hadn't heard a lot about this Michael character, but from what he gathered, he seemed to be a man of mythical status. His magic was comparable to that of wizards renowned throughout the world. His intellect was of a genius level, with no comparison for him to even be at the same level. "Byru, is it? Michael is ready to see you. Just go through the gates and enter his house," Lolo said, opening the gates for him to enter. That easy. The Dwarven King didn't think he would be let in so easily without even having to schedule a meeting. He would have thought that Michael's security detail would be a lot stricter than that. He was their leader, after all. Having 100 soldiers pat him down before he entered was the bare minimum. This only told Byru one thing. Michael alone was enough. Byru walked through Michael's door with his mind racing with thoughts about what he perceived Michael to look like. A burly man at the peak of his physical prowess? A hermit in the twilight of his life with a mind full of wisdom? But as the door opened, there was only one person that greeted him on the other side. "Oh, you must be Byru. "Welcome to our village," Michael said with the most casual of greetings. The Dwarven King was speechless. He thought he was ready for anything, but he would have never expected that the mastermind of this whole village and the owner of the Reborn company was none other than a 10-year-old human child. You're Michael?" Byru asked. Michael shrugged. "I guess." Byru had to shake his head, thinking that he was still drunk from beer. But no matter how much more sober he got, Michael would still remain as a child. "Forgive my rudeness," Byru said. "I wasn't expecting you to be so young." Experience new stories on Empire. Michael didn't take it to heart. "Don't worry about it. What brings you to my house? Does the Dwarven King need something?" Byru's eyes widened. Michael could see through his disguise. Knowing that there was no use in hiding it anymore, he let go of the magic surrounding his body. Slowly, his stature became taller, his eyebrows became a lot wilder, and his beard began to twist and tangle into the signature royal dwarven pattern. Michael was now looking at a dwarf who was even taller than him. Not only that, the dwarf also oozed a sense of regality and dominance, with a confidence that only monarchs had. "You know about my true appearance?" Byru asked. "Yes, sorry. My eyes could see through all types of magic, disguises included. And if I'm going to be honest, I have a friend named Fudge who informed me of your arrival as soon as you made contact with Thrain," Michael said with a casual tone. The Dwarven King could only chuckle once he heard that. If there was any doubt in his mind that Michael was truly capable of doing all the things he had done, then it was now long gone. Just from this little interaction alone, the Dwarven King knew that Michael was not to be messed with. "I'm sorry for trying to deceive you. I simply wanted to observe your village with an unbiased eye," the king apologized. But Michael didn't care about that. He cared more about the Dwarf King's opinion of the village. "And what do you think? Did you like the game?" Michael asked with a proud smile on his face. The king smiled. "Yes. In the brief time that I have visited your village, I have become enamored with everything it has to offer. So much so that I am willing to break thousands of years of tradition." He faced Michael with a serious expression and held out his hand. "I want to establish a friendly relationship with you, your village, and your company. Let us help each other and grow our territory to much greater heights." Michael was surprised with the king's straightforwardness. "That easy?" he asked him. "I thought the Dwarven Kingdom was closed off." Byru nodded his head, keeping his arm outstretched for Michael to take. "It was. But what you've shown me in this village made me understand why our kingdom hasn't prospered these past millennia. Enjoy new tales from Empire. I thought that I was protecting our kingdom by closing it off. But now I understand that we've just impeded our own progress. So, Michael, help us, and we will help you." Michael always wanted to have a good relationship with the Dwarven Kingdom. He just never thought it would be this easy. After all, he hadn't even done anything yet. Their king voluntarily visited their village and made up his own mind. He smiled and took the Dwarven King's hand. The two leaders of civilizations, one budding and one established, shook hands to symbolize their cooperation. The Dwarven King laughed and heartily smacked Michael's back. "Ha ha! This is the beginning of a fruitful endeavor," he said. "And before we sign a contract, I want to invite you into our kingdom and see what we have to offer. It's only fair." Michael would not say no to that. Seeing the inner workings of the Dwarven Kingdom would allow him to see what no human had ever seen before. He was especially curious as to how they produced the best metals and crafts in the world. "Let's go," Michael said excitedly. The next day, Michael and Byru journeyed forth to the Dwarven Kingdom using the automobile, with Fudge as their driver. Of course, before they left, the Dwarven King asked a favor for Michael to bring with him crates and crates of beer for his collection. Michael agreed, so long as he paid for the cost using Damascus steel. "Ha ha! If that's what it takes, then I shall send a shipment of Damascus steel every month in exchange for reserving my own production of beer," Byru said. After a few days, they finally reached the capital of the Dwarven Kingdom and were met with a lot of weird stares and amazed expressions as Michael finally showcased the true worth of the automobile. "A carriage with no horse? What is that metal craft? Is it alive? And a name on the side of the door. Reborn? Is that the same Reborn as the beer I'm drinking right now?" Whenever they went, a lot of dwarves stopped hammering their tools and walked out of their houses to follow the strange carriage. Finally, the automobile stopped in front of the royal castle, where they were met with the anxious stares of the king's advisors. The dwarven king first stepped out of the door, garnering gas from the dwarves that crowded the streets. But they would have never expected the next person to get out of the car. It was a human. From the looks of it, the dwarven king and the human were on good terms, with their king welcoming the human as if he were his guest. "Your Highness, what is the meaning of this? Why you brought a human with you?" his advisors asked hurriedly. The dwarven king presented Michael to his advisors and the crowd. "This is Michael, and he is the leader of the paradise in the parched lands. Not only that, he is the mind that brought us the nectar of the gods. Beer," he proclaimed, with his voice booming to the entire capital. "I have brought him here to establish an alliance between us, allowing us to exchange resources, knowledge, and even culture. Do not worry, my dear citizens. Once this alliance is successful, you will all be able to buy beer without having to hide from the authorities. You will learn the charm of baseball. And most of all, you will be able to purchase your own automobile like this one. This alliance will bring forth a revolution in our kingdom. We will prosper. Together." The dwarven king raised Michael's hand to the crowd. Clap, 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 clap. The crowd began to cheer and shout, which was mostly started by a few drunkards who celebrated the fact that they could buy all the beer they wanted. But soon after, more and more dwarves were caught up in the celebrations. They had seen the wonder of this strange metal contraption called an automobile, and as craftsmen themselves, they appreciated the complexity of the machine. And of course, by this point, the rumor of the paradise and the parched lands had already spread far and wide to the dwarven kingdom. They have heard wondrous stories from that place, but they've always refrained from going because of the restrictions in their kingdom. But now, with this alliance, they could finally visit this paradise for themselves. We want beer. We want to visit paradise in the parched lands. Hooray! Hooray! After the celebrations died down, the king led Michael to the different parts of the dwarven territory. He showed him the mines, where the dwarves dug up precious metals. It would then get sent to the forges, where the craftsmen would make it into a specific product. Finally, he was led to the very castle, which was built upon a giant active volcano spewing out lava and smoke at all times. But strangely enough, Michael noticed that the smoke didn't pollute the entire kingdom. It somehow vanished into the clouds without ever a trace of it coming back down to contaminate the ground. He asked the king about this, and, as it turned out, there was kind of a symbiotic relationship happening between the smoke coming from the volcano and the clouds up above. The clouds are made up of simple creatures, too small to even see in the naked eye, and have no complex thoughts to make them sentient. They sustain themselves by consuming the hot smoke of our volcano, and in turn, the creatures rain down elemental mana upon our kingdom, making it rich with magic. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. Just like the king said, this place was indeed rich with elemental mana, such as water, air, and earth, even though the kingdom was mostly made out of forges that produce fire mana. There should have been an imbalance, where fire mana was dominant and water mana was scarce, just like in the parched lands. But in this place, there was equilibrium. His mind suddenly lit up in a flurry of ideas upon learning of the existence of these creatures. These clouds could solve the lack of water mana in the parched lands. Michael guessed that these invisible creatures were a form of bacteria that mutated into a magical creature. Just like how this world had magical humans and monstrous demi-humans alike, it should have been obvious that there were also bacteria that evolved into a different species. Find your next read on Empire. Fortunately, this specific type of bacteria lived upon the clouds and sustained themselves through polluted smoke. Not only that, they also produced an abundance of mana as a side effect. If the village had these types of clouds above, then they would bring water mana to the entire territory, no longer making it a desert. He has always been hesitant to spread the use of petroleum fuel due to the harmful pollution that it produced. He had been using his own magic to counteract the effects of the pollution by himself, But with these bacteria clouds, he didn't have to do that anymore. Michael immediately asked the Dwarven King how he obtained these bacteria clouds. You want one for your village? Sure. We can give you a cloud seedling that can grow bigger than a mountain. Though, you'll need a lot of smoke for it to grow properly, or else it will just dissipate in the wind. And don't expect that your cloud will bless your lands with lots of elemental mana at the start. It took us thousands of years before our cloud got to this point. Michael was overjoyed once he heard this. They didn't have a volcano to sustain these special bacteria clouds, but they did have a steam turbine, which produced tons of smoke. As the village advanced in technology, it would incorporate petroleum oil as its main source of energy. The smoke produced by those factories would only serve to turn the territory into a better, healthier place. With a greater cloud, the more elemental mana would rain down on the village. Someday, the territory would not just experience summer throughout the year. There could be a rainy season, a winter season, and even spring. He was now surer than ever that allying himself with the Dwarven Kingdom was one of the best decisions he could have ever made. Are you ready to sign the official contract? The Dwarven King asked, and Michael answered with a resounding yes. They visited the throne room where the king's advisors and a couple of other high-ranking dwarves witnessed the signing ceremony of their alliance. Michael and the Dwarven King sat on opposite sides of the table, with their contracts in hand. Your village and your company Reborn will be welcomed at our gates. You can sell your products at reasonable rates without any problem, the king said, reading the contents of their contract. And the Dwarven Kingdom will be our village's provider of all things metal, such as steel, iron, and other such materials. And most of all, we are allowed to buy and distribute Damascus steel from your kingdom, Michael recited. The two men nodded, satisfied with the base agreement between their two territories. I would also like to employ your village in creating a road between the two territories. We will handle the materials, you will handle the work, the king proposed after talking with his advisors. Michael quickly agreed to this. Now that there was an alliance between the two territories, it would be a lot more convenient for citizens to easily traverse the distance without problem. He was already planning on proposing this agreement in the first place because he wanted automobiles to show their true worth as vehicles. And that could only be done through creating a flat road. I have another proposition, Michael said with a curious smile on his face. I want to build a train system that connects our territories. The Dwarven King and his advisors on the other side of the table showed confused looks on their faces. They had never heard of this train that Michael was talking about. The train is a convenient transport system that will connect the parched lands in this kingdom, needing only 1 day's worth of travel, Michael explained. The dwarves gasped, unable to believe that it would only take less than a day to travel all the way to the parched lands. And if Michael hadn't shown them his incredible inventions that defied reality, they would have denounced his words as nothing more than a lie. Is this true, Michael? How can you build such a fast vehicle? The king asked. And in turn, Michael also asked that same question to his trusted personal AI assistant. ChatJK2, can you tell me how to build a train? Certainly. I have constructed a railroad system that efficiently connects the Dwarven Kingdom to the parched lands. I will download the schematics to your brain in 3, 2, 1. Suddenly, tons of information washed over his mind, giving him everything he needed to know to build a train from scratch. He also saw a bird's-eye view of the completed project, with the trains running at full speed and full of dwarves excited to spend the holidays at the paradise in the parched lands. If you can build such a vehicle, then this partnership will become even more fruitful than I thought. If we can exchange materials within a day, then our commerce will prosper, the king exclaimed, his eyebrows flared from excitement. Even his advisors couldn't help but nod their heads fervently at the thought of what this alliance would bring them. Quick, let us sign this agreement, the king said, already dipping the quill into the ink. Michael did so as well. This contract was flexible as well, so if they wanted to change or add a few more things to their agreement, then they could easily mend it. He also had ChatJK2 parse through the agreement, and it found no loopholes or weaknesses that any party could exploit. I almost forgot. For this agreement to work, you must give your territory an official name. one that would mark its place on a map, the king said. Michael didn't have to think hard about the name of his territory. He knew that the village was growing far too big to even be called a village at this point, so he was already planning on giving his territory a proper name. Reborn. My territory will be called the Nation of Reborn. With the signing of the contract, the alliance between the Dwarven Kingdom and the Nation of Reborn was sealed in stone. This was a momentous occasion, one that would be written in the history books as the start of the Reborn Nation's global dominance. But that was a story for another time. Right now, it was a celebration. The dwarves prepared a sumptuous feast, with ale and beer ready for all to drink and eat. Michael talked with the other dwarves about the possibility of creating a Reborn Company headquarters station near the capital, and they agreed immediately. He planned for someone like Baldric to handle all the company business in the Dwarven Kingdom. Of course, he would have to coordinate with Castell about the acquisition of products because she was still the main CEO of the Reborn business. As he talked to more and more dwarves, all kinds of plans were born. For example, the kingdom ordered a large shipment of concrete to supply the rebuilding of the walls around their kingdom. This was where their alliance showed its benefits. The Dwarven Kingdom would send more lime and other such materials to the Reborn Nation. Then they would turn that into concrete, which would then be sent back to the Dwarven Kingdom to be used. That was the current priority of the kingdom, so that was what they tackled for now. But there were other major future projects that they would like to embark on after the construction of the walls. For example, they wanted to implement the plumbing and the electrical system in the entire Dwarven Kingdom. The plumbing system would be easy since they already have their own source of water. Michael just needed to create another sewer system and connect them to pipes around the Dwarven Kingdom. This would take a lot of time and effort, but it could be done with the cooperation of both territories. After that, they would implement the electrical system. The Dwarven King wanted Michael to connect the electrical lines from the Reborn Nation all the way to their kingdom. Just like the plumbing system, the kingdom would pay a monthly fee to the Reborn Company to supply electricity to all Dwarven homes. To make that work, Michael would have to upgrade the current steam turbine to accommodate the increased demand for electricity. Thankfully, the Dwarven King promised to supply him with all the Damascus steel that he needed, allowing Michael to create a bigger and more efficient generator for the turbine. Although it was a lot of work, the money they would generate from this business would truly be astronomical. The party went on, and Michael went outside the balcony of the castle to observe the Dwarven Kingdom in all its glory. Unlike their nation, which was lit up by light bulbs, this kingdom was instead lit up by forges and smiths that kept its fire lively through the night. There were celebrations all around, and all the beer that he brought with him was being spread and drunk in the taverns. "I never tire of seeing this sight," the Dwarven King said as he leaned on the balcony and looked out into his kingdom. Then he turned to Michael. "Now that we have officially become allies, there is something that I want to show you." The serious expression on the usually boisterous and drunk king told Michael that this was an important matter. "What is it?" he asked. "It is the reason why we have settled in this country in the first place. It is the reason why we shut ourselves off from the world and constructed walls to keep everyone away," the king explained. "Come." Michael followed the Dwarven King through the castle halls and towards the huge stone double doors, with intricate carvings of Dwarven history all over its two faces. This place was hidden deep inside the castle, where no infiltrator could access it unless they went out in the open through the castle doors. Yet it was still tightly guarded by armed guards at all times. Read exclusive chapters at Empire. The king nodded to the dwarves wearing full Damascus steel armor, permitting them to open the huge stone doors. The entrance to the cave-like basement opened outwards, and a boiling hot gust of air immediately assailed them. "What is in this place?" Michael asked. "This is where our biggest secret is located," the Dwarven King explained as he walked forward. They continued their journey through the cave, made out of nothing but obsidian. Michael went silent as he used his supreme skill, mana gathering to peer through the cave and see what was on the other side. And all he could see was fire. A tremendous amount of fire mana was gathered and bundled up into one clump of object. With his curiosity piqued, he walked faster to the light at the end of the tunnel, leading them to the Dwarven Kingdom's greatest secret. They entered a large domed room, where there was nothing but a large ball of fire in the middle of the cave. As Michael laid his eyes onto the giant ball of fire, he suddenly realized that there was an object inside it. Back in the olden days, we dwarves could create anything we wanted to create. There was no limitation to what we could make with our own hands, the Dwarven King told Michael. We were full of knowledge about the world, the universe, and the magical fabric weaved inside reality itself. And with that knowledge, we were able to create the greatest of crafts. And our ancestors stored everything they knew into one object, the God Forge. Michael could finally see the silhouette of the object inside the flaming ball of fire. It was the base part of an anvil, but it was clear that a large part of it had been destroyed. However, due to some unfortunate incident, the God Forge was split into pieces, spreading itself across this entire country. That is the reason why we have settled onto this land. We have come to bring back all of the pieces of the God Forge and restore it into its natural state. If we don't, then the fire that surrounds the God Forge will never cease to exist, and we will never obtain the knowledge hidden within. Michael stared in wonder at the God Forge, or at least a part of it. It was extremely large, about the size of an automobile. So, Michael could only guess that the finished God Forge must look even bigger than this. When we first moved into this country, our main goal was to find and retrieve the missing pieces of the God Forge. Unfortunately, it turned out that humans had already settled onto the lands, taking control of everything within it. Because of that, we couldn't retrieve the pieces. The previous kings of our kingdom decided to shut ourselves off from the world and protect the peace we have right now, until that opportune time when they could search for their relic. The Dwarven King sounded melancholic, as if he was saddened by the fact that it was improbable in his lifetime to fulfill his ancestors' wishes. Find more adventures on Empire. Meanwhile, Michael couldn't take his eyes off the incomplete God Forge. It was as if it was calling to him. Why haven't you tried to study the secrets of this piece? Michael asked. He could see blurry and vague inscriptions carved onto the very surface itself. From Byru's description, it seemed like this piece still held a part of the secret knowledge that they lost. We have tried, answered the Dwarven King. We made the best full metal armor that can withstand even the temperatures of lava, yet it was no use against this fire. We tried to douse it with water or air, but none were effective against the raging flame protecting the God Forge. We have tried all mystic and physical means to get through the fire, but we had only come about 2 meters close to the God Forge. This is a test. We need to prove that we are worthy of the God Forge and restore it to its prime state before it allows us to peek through the knowledge hidden within. He understood the Dwarven King's frustration. Having tremendous amounts of knowledge so close to them, yet so far away at the same time, was a frustrating feeling. He, too, wanted to see what the God Forge had to offer them. He wanted it so bad that his entire body was pulling him towards the flaming ball surrounding the God Forge. He hadn't felt this feeling ever since he set his eyes upon the magical library on the magic tower. What's wrong? The Dwarven King asked upon seeing the surprised face written on Michael's face. The reason for Michael's shock was a realization that dawned on him when he remembered the magic library. Back then, he impulsively touched the very nodes of the magic library and was suddenly endowed with all the information and knowledge it had to offer. He gained too much data that it led him into a state of unconsciousness. But after that, his personal AI assistant underwent a tremendous upgrade that led to his current state of power. The question then arrived in his mind. If he touched the God Forge, would he gain the knowledge contained within it? This lit up a fire inside him, a desire to take the risk and brave the big ball of fire, impeding him from getting to his goal. Dwarven King, I have a favor to ask, Michael said, keeping his eyes on the God Forge. You're my friend. Speak away, the king replied. Can I approach the God Forge? Michael's words were casual, as if he was just asking if he could look at a unique trinket or a cool sword displayed in the king's collection. But the God Forge was nothing but ordinary. You want to reach for the God Forge? Are you serious? Do you not see the flaming ball of fire that would melt even the hardest of minerals in just a few seconds? The Dwarven King asked, incredulous at Michael's small favor. Yes, I want to touch it and see if it has some kind of effect on me, Michael explained. The Dwarven King couldn't say anything else. Since Michael was an important friend to the Dwarven Kingdom, Byru didn't want to see him get incinerated into ashes. On the other hand, Michael seemed completely confident with himself if he even suggested such a thing. Byru rubbed his forehead and eventually decided to let Michael do whatever he wanted. If you can go through the ball of fire, then you have my permission to approach the God Forge. However, if I see that you can't survive the flames, then I will pull you back into safety without hesitation. Michael agreed immediately. If he found out that he couldn't go through the fire, he wouldn't push himself into death just to get to the God Forge as well. Now, how are you going to resist the flames? Asked the Dwarven King. I have a special skill, Michael replied. As he stepped forward, the flames emanating from the God Forge immediately tried to swarm his body, as if warning him not to approach any further. However, a protective layer of prismatic shield appeared around him and protected him from the blazing flames. The flurry of elemental mana in the shield collided with the flames, creating sparks that deflected away. This is my absolute unity defense. With the bubble of prismatic shield around him, Michael took another step forward, ignoring the flames that tried and failed to devour his defenses. The Dwarven King saw something he thought was impossible. Michael slowly walked towards the God Forge, completely unharmed. This was surprising to the king because he had mages try and defend themselves from the God Forge as well. He even employed an 8-star wizard to try and walk through the fire like Michael was doing right now. However, even they were left unable to defend against the onslaught of blazing fire from the God Forge. The 8-star wizard explained that the God Forge fire reacted proportionally to anyone who tried to enter. No matter if they were as weak as a 1-star mage or as strong as an 8-star mage, the God Forge would always bring out just enough firepower to sear through any of their defenses. Yet somehow, Michael was able to walk through the fire virtually unharmed. The Dwarven King began to wonder, was Michael's absolute unity defense really that strong, or did the God Forge deem Michael as worthy enough to receive their tutelage? Michael walked forward one step at a time. He could see nothing but a blinding light around him, as if he had just taken a plunge right into the heart of a star. However, it was clear to him that he was getting closer to the God Forge. The mana told him so. The entirety of the elemental mana was present in the flames. It wasn't just fire mana. There was water, earth, air, poison, lightning, dark, and light mana as well. And surprisingly, the congregation of all these elemental mana didn't seem to create a chaos of mana that canceled each other out. Somehow, the elemental mana worked together to produce an extremely pure and strong energy that could incinerate everything in its path. He finally understood why no mage or metal could pass through the fires of the God Forge. It was because they were only defending against the fire mana aspect of the flames. This left them completely unguarded to the other elements. Michael was the only person who could have done this. His absolute unity defense was a shield composed of all elements as well, which allowed him to fight against the other element from the God Forge flames. If it weren't for his natural affinity to all magic, he wouldn't have been able to pass through the fire. His 99.99% magic purity, as well as his SSS plus class magic talent, allowed him to effectively counteract the pure energy that the flames were giving off. He continued to walk forward until finally, he came across the God Forge in all its glory. It seemed to have been made out of simple metals, but Michael could feel the density of elemental mana packed within the God Forge. There was too much to even count. Right now, it was only the base piece of the God Forge, with a wide and steady rectangular base curving upwards. The evidence of fracturing was clear on the very material itself, with cracks and missing chipped pieces clearly visible towards the missing top part of the God Forge. But even in its fractured state, this was perhaps the best crafted object Michael had ever seen in his entire life. It was even better than the perfectly machined supercars or technology in his previous life. This one looked natural, as if the world itself had molded it from its infancy. Michael couldn't describe it. After all, how could he describe abstract perfection? The strange carvings on its surface were intermittently glowing, blinking in power, as if it was tempting Michael to finally obtain the hidden knowledge within them. He stepped forward and kneeled to the Godforge. He stretched his hand and brushed it against the first line of carvings on the base of the Godforge. Upon contact, a surge of information assaulted Michael's brain, overwhelming all of his senses and forcing him to grab his head in pain. Connecting to the fractured Godforge. Downloading its contents. Progress to next update, 10.59%. Progress to next update, 59.27%. Progress to next update, 99.99%. Updating software. Warning: the user will experience a tremendous amount of pain in the brain. Would you like to initiate the emergency shutdown protocol? Michael felt as if his head was being split in half, but he was still lucid enough to hear ChatJK2's voice echo through his mind. And despite the excruciating pain he was in, he decided not to initiate the emergency shutdown. Although he would like nothing more than to just sleep it off just like the last time, he knew that he could get through this just by his willpower alone. If it was truly dangerous, then ChatJK2 wouldn't have asked him to choose. It would have initiated it on its own. Stay updated via Empire. Michael forced himself to stand up and walk out of the Godforge's blazing fire. Slowly, he made his way out of harm's way, stumbling and almost tripping as he slowly reached safety outside the reaches of the Godforge's flames. Michael immediately lay down on the ground and closed his eyes. The Dwarven King asked him if he was okay, but after seeing the pain on Michael's face, he decided to ask for help from the guards and carry Michael to the nearest infirmary. Meanwhile, Michael took a couple of deep breaths, slowly feeling the pain in his mind subside. A couple of moments after that, the aftereffects of the software update finally wore off. He took one deep breath and opened his eyes. Congratulations, Michael. You have successfully upgraded the software to greater heights. I am ChatJK3, your personal AI assistant, knowledgeable in the mystic arts, and a novice in magic implementation. Michael heard his trusty old partner's voice much clearer now. And if he wasn't hearing it wrong, there was much more liveliness in its voice, as if he was speaking to a real person. You upgraded your software? Michael asked, still a little bit dizzy from what happened. Yes, Michael. I have absorbed all the available knowledge written in the fractured Godforge. A novice in magic implementation? What does that mean? He asked ChatJK3 after hearing its introduction. Due to the missing parts of the Godforge, I was only able to absorb the very basics of magic implementation. If I were to compare the knowledge you have absorbed against the ancient dwarves, then it would be equivalent to a novice apprentice in those ancient times. Michael slowly got his bearings and stood up on his own. Does magic implementation mean what I think it means? Can I imbue magic into objects? He asked ChatJK3, a little bit excited at the thought. That is right, Michael. You can now imbue elemental mana into an object. He obtained something incredible in the Godforge. After all, there was nothing in this world that had mana imbued into a lifeless object. Michael had always wondered why no one was able to do this yet, but as it turned out, the knowledge to do it was hidden in the Godforge itself. Since no one could approach the Godforge, no one had learned it all this time, except for Michael. Now, he knew how to imbue mana into an object. This is incredible, ChatJK3. What a wonderful upgrade you obtained. I appreciate the compliment, Michael. But that is not all that you have obtained. Most of the knowledge hidden within the Godforge was about skills and talents, giving you the ability to synthesize and build new skills from existing ones. You're now also able to imbue these skills on any of your allies at any time you want. As it turned out, the biggest haul he received from the Godforge was not the ability to plant mana into objects, it was the ability to plant skills into other creatures. According to ChatJK3, the knowledge written on the Godforge wasn't techniques on crafting or smithing metals. Surprisingly enough, It contained mostly about how skills worked and the very foundational mechanism that allowed them to work. This allowed ChatJK-3 to synthesize and mix skills together, creating an entirely new one from scratch. Although he didn't know why the God Forge had that kind of information written on it, he didn't hate the fact that it gave him the ability to give out any kind of skill he could think of. "Michael, you're all right," the Dwarven King said as he hurried back to the cave. There were a couple of Dwarven guards with him who were supposed to help carry Michael into their infirmary. But from the looks of it, he was completely fine right now. "Yeah, I just needed a little bit of time to center myself," Michael said casually. The Dwarven King couldn't help but shake his head. Even though Michael experienced something that could have been life-threatening, he still had a laid-back approach to everything that happened to him. "It was extremely impressive to see you reach the God Forge, but it is far too short to understand the knowledge hidden within. It will take us years of research and experimentation to read through the ancient texts on the God Forge. Unless we find a way to completely get rid of the fire, we will never be able to learn of its contents," the king said, a little bit dejectedly. "Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. HM? Oh, don't worry about that. I learned what was in the God Forge." "Ah, good. You found out the secrets of the God Forge." "You what? How did you? When did you?" The Dwarven King's voice thundered through the obsidian cave as he pestered Michael to tell him all about what he learned from the God Forge. Of course, Michael didn't give him the specifics on how he used ChatJK-3 to learn the contents of the God Forge. He simply told him that he had a special power that allowed him to absorb knowledge through touch alone. Since the Dwarven King had already seen Michael break the rules of reality with his absolute unity defense, he wasn't all that surprised that Michael had this kind of strange ability. "So, what did you find out?" the king asked, almost tiptoeing toward Michael like a kid ready to receive presents on Christmas Day. Michael told him an abridged version of what he learned, including the ability to imbue elemental mana into an object as well as the fundamental knowledge about skills. The king listened to Michael's explanation with his eyes glazing in joy. At the end of Michael's words, the Dwarven King couldn't help but shed a tear from his eyes. "Mithril, I can't believe that it's real." According to the Dwarven King, mithril was a mythical material described in the historical text that was said to have had the ability to store mana inside it despite being a non-living being. This material was what his ancestors used to create their legendary crafts, weapons, and armor. It was the single most important material in the world. However, it had been long lost in history, never to appear again, letting historians think that it was nothing more than just a myth and a folktale. But now, Michael found a way to bring them back. Mithril is the advanced version of Damascus steel, the Dwarven King explained. "We may have lost the ability to imbue mana into objects, but we still kept the knowledge to create the best material to store that mana, and that is Damascus steel." Michael was amazed at what the dwarves were able to create. He could only wonder what kind of prowess they held back in the olden days, when the complete God Forge was still in their hands. This begged the question, what led them to lose this knowledge? Michael could only speculate for now. Even the Dwarven King had no answer to his question. "Michael, I know that I haven't repaid all the things that you have done for me and my kingdom, but I beg of you to fulfill this one favor of mine," the Dwarven King pleaded, kneeling on the ground. "Please, teach us how to create mithril again. If you do, then we will be at your service. You have my undying word that the dwarves, from here until eternity, will forever be your allies." There were devotion and steadfastness in the king's eyes, showing how much he valued this information. Michael, on the other hand, didn't think it should be all that serious. "You don't have to kneel for that," Michael said, waving his hand. "Of course, I'm going to teach your kingdom how to make mithril. It's yours to begin with." The Dwarven King, swept up in his emotions, couldn't help but embrace Michael, almost squeezing the breath out of his lungs. "Thank you, friend. You have allowed us to restore our pride, our dignity. I will repay this favor with my life." Michael had to push the clingy Dwarven King away from him. Okay, I told you. It's not that serious." And so, Michael and the Dwarven Kingdom had another agreement. Dwarves with a lot of potential would live in the nation of Reborn and learn everything they need to learn to make mithril from Michael. In return, those dwarves would work for Reborn, acting as their smiths, their craftsmen, and their loyal soldiers. After they had sufficiently repaid the favor through years of service, those dwarves would then be able to return to the Dwarven Kingdom and spread the knowledge of mithril to the whole kingdom. Michael's citizens were also allowed to visit the Dwarven Kingdom as well, learning everything they needed to learn to make Damascus steel. After learning everything, they would then return to the Reborn Nation and produce their own Damascus steel. This was another win-win situation for both territories. After the celebrations and the official signing of papers with the Dwarven Kingdom, Michael had nothing left to do but return to the nation of Reborn and spread the good news of this cooperation. Michael's body descended into the shadows as he replaced himself with the clone he had back in his house in the parched lands. Upon arriving, he immediately sought the attention of Lolo to tell him what happened with the Dwarven Kingdom. There was a lot to do. First of all, they had to spread the word to the entire village that they were now officially a part of a sovereign state, where the named nation of Reborn would finally be visible on a map. This was a tremendous step in their progress, one that Michael was sure that everyone would rejoice in. The second thing they had to do was to start preparation for the projects he made with the Dwarven King. They needed a lot of manpower to create the railway system, the automobile projects, the plumbing and electrical system, and other such plans that needed a lot of organizing. The best hobman key to arrange everything was none other than Lolo, who knew every single inhabitant in this nation, including all their jobs and their talents. He would best know which one could handle which job. Michael was about to walk out the door to look for Lolo himself, but he suddenly realized that he was already in front of his gates. "Welcome back, boss," Lolo said, bowing to Michael. "I was just about to find you. There's a lot of things we need to discuss," he said. However, it was only now that he noticed that Lolo wasn't alone. Behind him were a variety of demi-humans and monsters who meekly looked up at Michael with curiosity and reverence in their eyes. "Who are they?" Michael asked. "Boss, while you were away, we did not stop our efforts in trying to find more refugees from the desert. And in our search, we happened upon a couple of different species and villages that needed our help. Upon hearing about our situation, they traveled through the desert in hopes of settling here in our village," Lolo explained. "There was a group of demi-humans who had the top half of a human, but the bottom half of a goat. Chat JK3 explained to him that they were a species called satyrs. We beg of the magnificent human, please accept us. We have nowhere else to go," the oldest satyr said, burying his head on the concrete ground, trying to plead his case to Michael. "We beg." The 30 or so satyrs behind him copied his movements and bowed their heads at Michael. Upon seeing this, the other group of demi-humans begged for Michael's mercy as well. "Human, help us. We will not take much, for we can sustain ourselves with nothing but grass. We just need a safe haven from the black liquid." This other group of demi-humans had a very short stature, almost the same as the dwarves. However, they had skin made entirely out of stone, with grass and flowers growing on their bodies. And interestingly enough, they all looked like they were lifeless stone boulders when they bowed their heads to Michael. According to the bestiary, they are a species called trolls, who live in the desert among the rocks and dunes. Chat JK3 explained. "Us too. Please see help us shield ourselves from this heat. Our scalus are setting." Next to the trolls was another interesting group of demi-humans. From what he could see, these species were mostly made out of women, with their top half as humans, while their bottom halves were that of a giant snake's body. Chat JK3 told him that they were called lamias, and that the majority of their species were women. Michael almost felt awkward staring at their bodies because it looked like they were wearing their scales as a two-piece bikini. "Oh, honored human, please accept our patronage. We will devote ourselves to your service. Please let us live in this paradise." The last group of demi-humans was the tallest, and in contrast to the lamias, were composed mostly of men. Just like most demi-humans, their torso up to their heads was human, while the bottom half of their torso was connected to what seemed to be a camel's body. These demi-humans are a variant of centaurs. They have evolved to have humps on their horse bodies to preserve water in the desert environment. The demi-humans all show desperation in their eyes. They clutch the ground as if they were afraid of ever separating from this paradise now that they had found it in the middle of this desert. "Boss, what should we do?" Lolo asked. "What's there to do?" "Of course we're going to take them in," Michael said nonchalantly. He had already decided his mind before they even arrived in this place. He vowed to himself that he wouldn't turn away any demi-humans who sought refuge in their nation, no matter the kind of species they were. As Michael liked to say, the more the merrier. "Tell Khan to prepare a temporary lodging for them, while we prepare a suitable habitat for their species," Michael said to Lolo. "Experience more on Empire." The old hobmanki bowed to Michael, with a smile forming on his mouth. He knew that his boss wouldn't heartlessly turn away those in need, just like how he accepted them when they were just mankeys. "I have already instructed Kong to give them housing, boss." Michael nodded, appreciating their nation's mayor for his quick actions. For the satyrs, make sure they have houses inside the forest, with plenty of greens and vegetation growing. For the lamias, we should construct a river across the territory where they could freely live in. Michael made sure to accommodate their different needs. Unlike the hobmankeys, demi-humans like satyrs and lamias were not suited to live in concrete houses. They needed their own space that was suitable to their needs. This surprised the demi-humans. They were already grateful enough that Michael gave them permission to live in their paradise, but now he also planned to give them their own version of a paradise without even asking for anything in return. "Oh, and once you have all settled in, make sure to visit my house so that I can awaken your talents." Soon enough, each of the demi-humans was given a chance to meet with Michael face to face as he gave them their names and talents. The first batch was the satyrs, which seemed to have been adept in everything nature-related. One had the talent to become an oakwood engineer, while the other one had the talent to become an herbal tea maker. And as he awakened their talents, he was given the ability to evolve their bloodline as well. Satyrs. Species, satyrs. Type, demi-human. Difficulty, element, earth, air. However, just as he was about to evolve their bloodline, ChatJK3 suddenly gave him the option to choose between the different paths that a satyr could take. For example, the satyr with the herbal tea maker talent had the option to evolve into aromatic herbalist satyr. This subspecies of satyrs has a unique sixth sense specialized in finding the best combination of tea leaves to achieve the most aromatic tea. Herbalist assassin satyr. This subspecies of satyrs turns their specialty in teas into creating the most potent poisons that are difficult to detect. Magical herbalism satyr. This subspecies of satyrs can imbue magic onto their teas to achieve mystical effects. Michael was surprised with the options that he could take with their evolutions. He never had this option before when he evolved the others. Stay tuned for updates on Empire. ChatJK3. Is this the effect of your software update? Yes, Michael. The Godforge contained a lot of information about the innate skills in a living being, as well as the very structure of their body that allows for that skill to be used. Using that knowledge, you can choose the evolution path of a creature that they were innately talented in. It seemed that he had still underestimated how powerful ChatJK3 became after its software update. This was a power completely broken, especially since he could evolve a creature into an entirely new bloodline suited to whatever work they were going to do in the future. But although Michael had the chance to decide the satyr's fate for himself, he didn't choose to do so. He wanted the satyr to pick for himself. There are 3 choices for you to evolve into. Michael explained clearly about the 3 different bloodline paths he could take. "What do you think? Which one will fit you the most?" he asked. The satyr, overwhelmed with this life-changing choice, couldn't help but freeze up in front of Michael. The demi-human had never even thought it was possible to evolve into a higher creature, much less have the choice to choose his path. "I am at your mercy, boss. I am willing to become anyone that will help you," the satyr said, prostrating himself to Michael. This led Michael to shake his head in disappointment. The reason he asked for the satyr's opinion was because he didn't want to be responsible for this choice in the first place. Suddenly, a bulbous figure emerged out of Michael's shadow and jumped in front of the satyr. "Choose the assassin one. It's cool," Fudge said, jumping up and down in excitement. Michael almost forgot that Fudge, the edgy rogue slime, had been asking for more help in his mission to spread his name to the world. And now that someone had the chance to become a ninja, Fudge couldn't help but jump at the chance. "Will I be of service to the boss with this?" the satyr asked. And of course, Fudge nodded his non-existent head fervently to try and influence the satyr's choice. "Yes, you will be of tremendous help to Master by becoming his shadow," Fudge said, moving closer to the satyr. Michael knew he had to stop this. Don't listen to him. He just wants someone to be like him. But it seemed he was too late. The satyr's eyes glistened as his mind began to wander upon the rogue slime's words. "It is decided. Boss, I want to become a ninja as well," the satyr said. Michael sighed and pinched his forehead. "It's your choice," he said, exhausted from dealing with the two of them. He chose the second option, evolving the satyr into herbalist assassin satyr. And soon after he chose this option, the satyr was suddenly enveloped in a blinding light that lasted for a few seconds. After that subsided, the satyr showed his evolved form to the world, with his goat legs becoming a lot more suited for stealth. Not only that, but his fur also turned darkish blue, which could blend into the night. "Thank you, boss. I will serve my purpose to you and make the most potent poison in the world," the satyr said. Good. Now we're talking. You are a nice addition to our cult." Fudge rejoiced. Michael chose to ignore them for now. It was too early in the day to get stressed with shinibi-minded ninjas like them. Now that you have evolved, what skill would you like to learn? It could be anything you want. Since the satyr had just evolved, he could learn any skill he wanted. According to ChatJK3, the more talented a being, the more skills they could have. This meant that choosing a skill must be taken with great thought and foresight. Unlike a spell which would be learned by anyone as long as they had a magic theory and the right mana to cast it, a skill was completely different. A skill was like having an extra limb on their body. It doesn't need mana to be cast, just like how a hand doesn't need mana to move. Because of this, a skill cannot be learned by anyone. It was naturally obtained because of their talent. At least, that was before Michael touched the Godforge and learned how to synthesize his own skill. Now, Michael could give anyone any skill they wanted to learn, which meant that they needed to think carefully about which skill they wanted to have. "I can give you any skill you can think of. Think carefully and tell me how it works," Michael said to the satyr. However, the satyr didn't even think for a couple of seconds before giving his answer. "Boss, give me the ability to become like a shadow, like my leader Fudge." Michael went through the evolution of each of the satyrs. Thankfully, none of them had the chance to become an assassin or a ninja like the first satyr. They all had diverse evolution paths, which were unique and catered specifically to their talent. This further enhanced their abilities to do the job that they were already good at, making them extremely proficient in their fields. Their unique talents became quite a hot topic within the nation. Their talents would completely make a lot of work so much easier, so a lot of hobmankeys wanted to recruit them in their field. This lessened the workload, especially with the influx of projects that needed to be done in a short time. There were also quite a few satyrs who had talents that coincided with different jobs. For example, one had the talent and evolution path to become a treehouse specialist, which fell on both the construction and the farming side. The leader hobmankeys like Kong and raced to get the satyrs to become their employees, and wanted the satyr to help them create a greenhouse using a treehouse as shelter. Meanwhile, Kong wanted the satyr's talents to help implement wooden constructs in buildings. In the end, it became Lolo's problem, whose job it was to decide which citizen had which job. Thankfully, as more and more demi-humans awakened their talents and evolved, the demand for workers slowly filled up. The second batch was the Lamias, which surprisingly didn't have any specialties in their talents. It was quite varied, with one ranging from being a water sorceress to a school teacher. Like the satyrs, they were also given the chance to evolve their bloodlines into something unique only to them. Of course, Michael gave them the freedom and choice to do whatever they wanted. But despite that, most of the Lamias were far too thankful to Michael to choose for their own sake. They consulted Lolo about the projects that needed more workers, and they chose their evolution based on that. Michael thought that this was too nearsighted, but the Lamias said that they were content with simply repaying his kindness to them. As a consolation, he gave them skills that weren't related to their jobs. It ranged from having the skill to simply turn their snake lower body into a human leg full of scales, to having the skill to sing in perfect pitch and harmony. And like the satyrs, the Lamia's change in physical appearance corresponded to their new bloodline. Some remained as a pure Lamia, while some gained wings or gained another pair of eyes on their head. After the Lamias, Michael awakened the talents of the trolls. As expected, these stone-like creatures had the affinity to have construction-related talents. Their abilities were sorely needed in the nation, especially since there were so many projects that they had to work on with the Dwarven Kingdom. Lolo immediately assigned the newly evolved trolls to work on the railway and road construction project that connected all the way to the Dwarven Kingdom. Finally, the centaurs were up next. This group of noble-minded demi-humans was the most surprising for Michael. After all, their talents were mostly offensive-based, which meant that they had an affinity for physical strength and dominance. One of them had 3 evolution paths. Jousting Centurion. This subspecies of centaurs is adept at charging through an enemy and piercing through their defenses in one move. Lightning-born Centaur. These centaurs pride themselves on speed, blitzing past enemy lines, and using their versatility to escape the enemy's grasp. Tyrannical Rex Centaur. This subspecies of centaurs may be slow, but they make up for it through their strength. They can power through any defense, destroying enemies that dare to get close to them. The centaur's eyes glowed in excitement once Michael explained the evolution paths he could take. Boss, we are a herd of prideful centaurs. We are steadfast, solid, and strong. I think that I fit the tyrannical Rex Centaur the most, the elder centaur said. Michael respected his decision and did as he requested. Soon, the centaur was enveloped in a white light that once faded, showed his new evolution. The elder centaur had grown a lot bigger, almost too big to even fit in Michael's garage. Not only that, his body now had dark reddish scales scattered around his upper human body. Somehow, Michael felt as if he was looking at an extremely ancient dinosaur, whose strength came from the biting power of its strong jaws. Thank you, boss. I will make sure to protect this territory with my own body, the tyrannic Rex Centaur said. Since they weren't in a state of war or had any sort of conflict, the Centaur now became the chief law enforcer of their nation. Even though no one had committed any crime yet, just the presence of the tyrannic Rex Centaur would be enough to dispel any bad thoughts from everyone in his vicinity. Michael then continued to awaken the talents of the other centaurs and evolve them into unique bloodlines. However, when he asked them to choose what they wanted to become, each and every single one of them chose the same evolutionary path as their leader. They all wanted to obtain the same steadfast strength and stature as their leader. Read exclusive chapters at Empire. We are one herd, boss. We will all follow one path, for we are strongest when we are together, the centaurs explained. Michael thought this was another waste since they could have chosen extremely unique evolutionary paths. However, they were adamant in their choices. There was nothing else he could do. As they said, they were one herd. One choice was the choice for all. He could only console himself with the fact that there were other centaur herds out there in the parched lands. Surely, they would choose a different evolution if Michael awakened their talents. And so, the new inhabitants of the nation of Reborn finally settled down into their own territory. They had their own jobs and contributed greatly to the nation as a whole. Fudge, do you want to learn a new skill? Michael asked. Now that the new citizens of their nation had their own customized skills, Michael felt it was only fair that the older citizens weren't left out of the loop. He wanted to give them something as well. The rogue slime popped out of the shadow and saluted Michael by bumping its hands on his chest, much like a famous character from a very famous anime in his previous life. I would be honored, Master. But just as he was about to ask ChatJK3 to suggest a skill for Fudge, it suddenly suggested something else. Would you like to evolve Fudge? That's possible? I thought I had already evolved him the first time. Yes, Michael. It is possible to improve the bloodline of your allies because of the software update. That's good to know. Then, that means I can also evolve the Hobmankeys like Kong and Ann. Now that he knew this was possible, he decided to call the other leaders of the nation to start their evolution. Stay connected through Empire. Lolo, the mayor, was the first one to arrive. He was followed by Kong, who was the chief engineer of the nation, and Ann, who was the agricultural chief in charge of everything farming-related. He also called forth Thrain and Baldric, who became the chief dwarven representative and the chief correspondent of the Dwarven Reborn Company, respectively. The first one to evolve was his trusty old shadow, Fudge. He didn't know what the slime was doing on a day-to-day basis, but he was instrumental during operations that needed a lot of scouting. His shadow clones could easily spread to a lot of people, gathering information faster than normal means. As he activated his supreme skill, Gift Bestowal, he was given 3 choices for Fudge's second evolution. Dark Void Slime. This subspecies of rogue slimes gains the ability to walk through the void, allowing them to travel anywhere they want. Shadow Flame Slime. These slimes gain the ability to turn their shadows into inextinguishable flames, causing damage to anyone caught in them. Mystical Eye Slime. This subspecies of rogue slimes gains a magical eye, allowing them to trap their enemies into an illusion, copy their techniques, and gain insight into a target once they make eye contact. Michael didn't even have to ask Fudge to know which one he was picking. Master, I can finally have a Char * non of my own. Fudge shouted excitedly. He knew that this strange eye ability looked exactly the same as a famous technique from an anime in his previous life. And since he was a fan of it as well, Michael knew that this was a good choice for Fudge. Fine. At least you don't have to steal someone's eye to gain this ability, Michael joked. Fudge was shrouded in a white light before subsiding and showing his new form. Just like before, he wore a black rogue outfit, but this time there was a metal plate above his head and an eye patch that covered his eyes. Thank you, Master. I shall spread your name and glory to everywhere the darkness touches. After his evolution, Fudge descended back down to his shadow. Michael was sure that he was going to role-play as a ninja again. Kong ended up choosing to become a civilization builder Mankey, which gave him a lot more calculating power to plan all of the projects in the nation simultaneously. He thanked Michael and immediately left to start the other projects, and evolved into a crop queen Mankey, and was able to understand vegetation on an intuitive level, allowing her to plant crops and seeds that were not in season, all because she knew what they needed to survive in a desert environment. She asked for Kong's help to continue expanding the farm, and the two of them went on to continue their work. Lolo became a Governor Mankey, which made him look a lot younger and spreer than before. He seemed to have gained more charisma, allowing him to easily manage all the citizens through his speech alone. Finally, he faced the 2 dwarves. Surprisingly, Michael was able to evolve them as well. According to ChatJK3, there were a lot more choices for the dwarves' evolution because the Godforge mainly focused on their race, which wasn't surprising given that they were the ones who created it in the first place. Out of 5 choices, Baldric chose to become a golden dwarf, giving him a computing ability equivalent to a computer. Since he would handle all the business with the Dwarven Kingdom, this ability was greatly needed. As for Thrain, he chose to reconnect with his old roots, becoming an ancient dwarf. And with this evolution, he could understand smithing techniques much more easily than before. Michael decided to teach him the ways to create mithril, since he was the one most suited to learn such a complicated task. After that, Michael continued to evolve each and every single citizen of the nation of Reborn. Most of the Mankeys chose to follow their leader. For example, the engineering Mankeys who worked under Kong also chose to become a civilization builder Mankey so that they could cooperate with each other better. It was also a good time to formally ask the inhabitants of this territory to become citizens of the nation of Reborn. Those who chose to become a citizen would be able to evolve and gain a custom skill. Almost all of them chose to become a full-fledged citizen of the nation, with very few exceptions from the dwarves who were just visiting this place as a holiday vacation. Either way, Michael was glad to learn that they were now at least 3,000 citizens of the Reborn nation. Lolo, prepare a huge feast and celebrations in the plaza. We are going to have a party to commemorate this monumental occasion. This is the day that the nation of Reborn was officially created.